So Laura had said she was going to join online, and I don't see her signed in.
Okay.
Kathy, I'm letting her in right now.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And then the USDA guy was also going to sign in online.
Yeah.
Mary Carol Solon.
Oh,
Is now
Mary
joining.
Carol Solon.
Yay.
Hi, Mary
Member
Carol.
of- Hello.
Did you get the slides?
I certainly did, and thank you very much for the delivery.
Okay, good. No problem.
So, and I've read everything, and I'm ready to rock and roll.
Okay.
It's a little after 5. You guys, we good to get started? I think with the administrative portion of them. We only have an hour here, or a little bit less
Absolutely.
now.
So do we have Laura on?
Laura is on.
Okay, then I won't text her.
Kathy, do you want to do roll call, or I can do it?
I figured it's easier for you because I don't know who's in the room.
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Just 1 sec.
So online you have Mary Carol Solom, Laura Ola, Robert Wren, and myself.
I have a whole lot of people, it looks like.
I know.
Okay.
And then Matt, do you want us to go around the room and
Sure,
say
all
our
right.
names?
Yeah, I think that'd be good, so everybody can hear online who's here. Yeah. So you want to start, Michelle?
Sure, and Michelle Hopp.
Valerie McCullough.
Charlie Wilhelm. Doug Jertson.
Matt Dayock with the Army.
And Curtis Hedman with Department of Health Services.
Chris Hansen.
Luke Lample with the DNR.
Is now joining.
Okay.
Roger Heidenreich.
We had a couple more people
Is
come
now
online.
joining.
I don't know if they want to speak up if they recently joined.
This is Roger Heidenreich. I just joined.
Okay.
This is the safest place.
Who's
And
number?
Kathy, this is Robert. I dialed in the 225 number.
Okay. Whose number is 3850 at the end?
That's Mary Carol.
That's Mary Carol. Okay.
Carol Solom.
All right. I think that's everyone then.
Thank you all for joining today. Hopefully online you all can hear us. If at any time you can't hear us, let us know, and we'll either speak up or adjust as needed. But thank you for participating in the administrative meeting today. As I think you all saw, I sent out, we've got 3 major topics to cover today that we can hopefully get through. One being a review of the application for a TAP grant, again, for the Badger RAD, and it goes along with a request for waiver, which exceeds the $100,000 lifetime cap, which is no problem. It's just a formality, but essentially today, I sent you all the application and the letter requesting the waiver. The principal point of discussion today is to take a vote. It does require a vote of the RAB to move forward with a TAP grant. So, and then if anybody has any feedback on things that they would like to see from that TAP grant, and or contractors that they have in mind that could potentially facilitate, providing that subject matter expertise, that technical expertise to the RAB, that can be included in the application, and then we'll staff that up to the headquarters department of the Army, and they'll, I've already greased the skid, they'll approve the waiver, and then it's just a matter of getting the contractor on board. So the second point of discussion today.
Identify the project that it's for? Is this for the proposed plan review, or?
Right, so in the discussion on the application, it describes what services you want to have. So essentially you could list everything that's ongoing. You could list the groundwater contamination. You could list Gruber's Grove Bay. You could list site inspection.
Randy Palma, Hotel Nation.
Is now joining.
But we can delve into the specifics of that in a moment. The second point of action today is to discuss and potentially vote on, I don't know if we'll get there today, the new operating procedures for the RAD. I think most of you have seen those a couple of times now. We've gotten a number of comments. We've included most of those comments with, I think, the exception of Laura's, who we received the other day. So we can walk through that and hopefully refine that. Kathy Kropp has got it up on the screen, and we'll make changes as we discuss, and then we'll send that back out. If we don't get to a vote today, we can vote on that next time. But that's the second point of discussion, and then the third point of discussion is new members for the RAB. So we'll discuss that as well. So, any questions leading up front, or any other agenda items that that jump to mind to cover in the next hour? No? Okay. With that, I think the easiest one, and we can knock it out, is the TAP application. So, as Kathy denoted, and I do have copies. Do you guys want copies? I send it out via email, but I can pass out the actual application. And
Hey, Matt, Laura has her hand raised.
okay, go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to suggest on the order of the agenda items is to discuss the possible new members and then operating procedures, because I think the new information may inform how we do the operating.
Absolutely. Do you mind if we do the TAP first and then move into new members?
Yes, I think it might flow a little better.
Okay, that sounds great. So this is the proposed application and a letter requesting waiver. So I good to see you. So I don't think we need to spend much time on the actual letter itself, but just for your awareness, that's kind of the short and sweet letter that's being utilized to request the waiver. But on the application itself, as Kathy mentioned above, mentioned earlier, if you look down at section 8 of the application, that is where the RAB gets to input information as to what kind of support it's seeking from a technical perspective. So right now you can read what's in there. It's pretty generic. I think we tried to include kind of just an overarching message there that says the TAP will support any ongoing CERCLA activities, cleanup activities pertinent to Badger Army Ammunition Plant. So certainly if there's something more specific that anybody wants to incorporate there, we can do so. And then we've got the statement of eligibility in block 9. And then block 10 is the qualifications you all are seeking from that technical representative. So we put some general information in there as far as skill set, ability to communicate, background, those kind of things. And then if you flip the page over, block 14 and block 16 are...
Randy Palma, Holy Congregation.
Is now exiting.
Lost. So 14 and 16 are the opportunity for you all, if you know of and or have a preference as to who would provide that support, then you would implement that there in the application. So I guess any overarching questions as to the application itself? Anything we can add to block number 8 as far as specific services that you all are looking for? Or are you fine with the general language?
If I could interrupt for 1 minute, Kate, could you mark Dennis Hancock and Randy Poima?
Yep.
As the present there online.
I've got him. Thanks, Kathy.
So the grant is for $25,000 annually, and then up to, well, we'll exceed that $100,000 mark. So, but we can spend up to $25,000 per fiscal year on the services. So, what we would do, assuming you all vote to pursue the TAP grant, is utilize our contracting agency at Fort Sam Houston, and then go out and procure those services for you all to take advantage of, and work with them directly to meet any needs you all may have.
Okay, Laura has a question. Go ahead, Laura.
Can we specify, I can't see the documents on my screen. So one is, at this point, can we recommend like USGS as the consultant?
It cannot be a government agency. That is one of the stipulations. So it's got to be a contractor.
Okay.
So I think it's got to be a small business. I mean, there's, as with anything in the federal government, there's all these criteria that
There we go.
I guess the question I have about that is we did use USGS as our last TAP consultant.
Did you? Yeah.
Yeah, and
The way I read the rules, that's.
Yeah, if that wasn't a true TAP consultant, so
Yeah, I guess
that
so.
didn't go through this process and have a contract awarded. We already had a contract in place with USGS for support, and so we just extended that contract for them to be able to support the RAB. It wasn't done through the competitive nature that these TAP grants have to go through. Mr. Serrar just was willing to dedicate part of the services he had purchased from USGS for the RAB specifically.
okay, thank you.
Did you have another question, Laura, or do I just need to lower your hand?
Oh, sorry about that.
So Laura, can you see the application on the screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, tell me if you need me to scroll up.
Yeah, this is Randy. Please scroll up. Thank you.
And you all should have, I think I sent an email with this last week, so if it facilitates it better to pull it up on your own screen, if you'll take a look at that as well, it should have been attached last week.
Right, the email was Friday, 7/29 at 10:31 a.m., if you want to look for it in your email. I just grabbed it from there, Matt.
Perfect, thanks, Catherine.
Well, I reviewed it, Mrs. Lord. I don't have any problem with it. Are you looking for a motion to approve document as presented?
Yeah, so we're not necessarily approving the document, we're approving the request to provide the services or seek the grant, so. Anybody have any questions or any additional input?
I have one question. In block number 8, it's talking, and I'm really grateful to Susan who wrote this on my behalf. But in block number 8, it does show, it's talking about the site-wide groundwater proposed plan, and that does not, in my mind, include Gruber's Grove Bay.
You're right, yeah, we could add Gruber's Grove Bay.
So if there's anything that the group can think about that is not just this, that we want to add, we probably should, just in case.
Yeah, I suggest making it as broad as possible so that there's not any issue with, asking for.
So Matt, we may need to ask for guidance on that, because I don't believe you can do the same project twice.
Mhm.
And so since Gruber's Grove Bay is not going to happen in next fiscal year, they might want to wait and do Gruber's Grove Bay on a separate tap in the year that it's happening,
Okay, that's good feedback.
just for your consideration.
Back up for a second. Can you hear me okay? This is Roger. Right.
Which way did you want me to go?
No, I'm saying back up and the whole concept here of what we're doing. First of all, I'm not able to get in on your Microsoft application there to join the meeting, so I'm just on via phone. And I don't think I ever got a copy of this TAP proposal that you're talking about.
Yeah, so it would have come Friday, July 29th. Let
From
me
who?
see, it was sent to all the RAB members.
I can.
Well, I've got it July 29th open here, and there's a letter from Michelle Hopp, and that's all there is.
So are you RLHEIDENREICH@MSN.com?
That's correct.
You're listed on the to address. It would have come from Clayton Dayoc, D-A-Y-O-C.
I've got that open, and there's a BAAP RAB TAP waiver document.
Right, and then the next one is the TAP form. That's what they're going over.
I don't think I have a TAP form, but when did we come up with the idea that, when did we as a group decide that we needed expert consultation? I don't remember that happening at any previous meeting recently.
So it was discussed when Susan Elrod chaired the meeting, and what Matt is asking for is for the RAB to vote whether they do want it or not. So it isn't a done deal until the RAB votes, and that hasn't happened yet.
Well, my personal opinion is that last time I heard somebody say we used the USGS, and I kind of thought that was like, you know, the Army hiring somebody on our behalf, and I'm not sure that we got a unbiased opinion from the USGS. Seems to me we should have an independent contractor and not just step into this thing and hire the same people we've had before.
Right, and that's what I was explaining. The USGS wasn't done under this process, and so this process is an independent entity. They bid on the contract, and it goes through the installation contracting command, but it is still paid for the Army on your behalf.
Okay, but we have to come up with a statement of work that we want this contractor to do, right?
Right, and that's the project purpose and description that's listed on this form. From that, a statement of work will be developed.
Well, who's doing that?
Well, you're not at that point yet. You haven't even decided that you want to pursue this yet.
Yeah, we would, sir, we would do that on your behalf and send it out to you all to review, assuming the waiver was approved and you all vote to move forward. We prepare the statement of work, send that out. You guys would then review and approve that, and then we would solicit interested contractors to provide that service, and then select a contractor.
You have a motion on the table?
Okay.
Randy, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. First, I wanted to comment to Kathy that the gentleman, Roger, I think it was, that was just speaking, that couldn't get into the presentation. So if you use that link that's in the slides email that you just sent out, that is a corrupted link and leads you to some bizarre Teams meeting page. So that's why you can't get in if you use that one. And then more importantly, on the discussion that we're having right now, I mean, I only see 8 people in the meeting, and I don't believe we have a majority of RAB members present to make a decision, but I guess I'd wait for other people to comment on that.
So Randy,
Okay, how many people are in the room?
We've got
11. Hold on, let me see.
got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, looks like we have 13 official RAB members at this point, if I'm tracking everybody.
Okay.
Which would be
Yeah,
the
Randy, you're
majority.
only seeing who's online. You can't see who's in the room.
Right.
So that is.
Randy, where did you go to get a non-corrupted link?
Yeah.
I went through the link that Laura sent to Dennis.
Oh, okay. When was that, Laura? I remember.
Dennis
seeing
Hancock.
it.
I think she sent that email to the whole group.
I tried, some of the emails.
Yeah.
I also sent out an email just a little bit ago.
Believe
Did
me,
you
I'm
receive
not
that?
real proficient at it, but
Let me,
Well, that's the one that Randy said was corrupted.
let's see here.
So we can work that in the background, I guess. Does anybody have a motion to approve the request for TAP grant?
I made a motion to approve, but I did not hear a second.
I'll second that.
I'll second that, Mary Carol.
Lots of seconds.
lots of seconds.
Okay. Do we have anybody voting no?
What? This is Roger. I still don't know what we're gonna ask the folks that we're getting the $25,000 to do. Are we just opening our checkbook for them to do whatever they want? It seems like you have to have a reason to ask for money before you ask for money.
Right, so according to the application right now, they would review the site-wide groundwater proposed plan, which is currently in draft format, and they would provide independent technical input to you all as the RAB, as to, and if you will, kind of speak in layman's terms about what the Army's proposing in concert with WDNR. And then there would be a decision document, a record of decision, codifying that remedial action that's selected. And then it also includes support looking at the remedial design of implementation of that remedy. So there's specific things that they would take a look at that the Army's in the process of providing that would, and you could ask them specific questions and hopefully trust that you could get an unbiased answer from technical experts
Right now, they just need this.
and have that dialogue with them. That's really the intent. I mean, the intent is to support you all in any questions and concerns you may have as we walk through this process.
Okay. I was just able to get in.
I'm getting some feedback.
So we have a motion, we have a second. We didn't formally vote, you just asked if there was any negative.
Yeah, I just was curious if anybody else has any. So all for the motion to approve the grant for.
Roger Heidenreich.
Is now exiting.
He's getting in and out, yeah.
Technology.
I know.
So all for the motion to approve the TAP grant?
All right.
Did you all hear that online?
Yes, aye.
Any against the motion? Okay, all right, sounds good. I think we can move forward with that. All right.
We've had some votes in the chat too.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, Dennis Hancock voted yes. He said section 9, remove the I after not limited to.
Oh, to make it pretty.
Okay, sure, got it.
That was a good catch.
There's also a spelling error in the first sentence up there too, of that same section. Right there.
Oh, thank you.
And this is Randy. I just emailed everyone the link that works for the meeting.
That does work, you said?
It does, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we can move to our second agenda topic for.
I have a question.
Who's
This is
speaking?
Roger. I'm not,
Okay.
can you hear me okay?
Yep.
This thing that we just approved for $25,000, what happens if it costs more than that?
That's the maximum value. So we're
So
not.
whatever contractor we choose or the Army chooses for us has to agree to the 25,000?
That's correct.
Okay. So what happens if they can't do the job for that amount of money?
They're limited to providing services up to that $25,000 mark. So as they review documents, as they coordinate with you all and provide that expertise, you know, if there's additional back and forth that requires time and effort, then that erodes the rest of the capacity to look at further documents. So.
And they may look at the statement of work and say, okay, I can do this, this, and this, but I can't do these. And so you know that when the contractor is being selected, what they are willing to do or unable to do.
Okay. It just seems like we're getting the cart before the horse here, but that's just me.
Well, it's kind of the way the Army works, if I understand it correctly.
Yeah,
So it is so this is just the very beginning of the process. It takes quite a while to get the actual contract in place. But you have to start with, yes, we want to do it, and because you are already over the 100,000 limit, we have to get a waiver first before we can even say, yes, you want to do it. So Matt's trying to get as much of that done up front as possible.
Okay.
Okay. I think, Laura, you suggested discussing new members, I believe, before we jump into the operating procedures, and we're going to run short on time, potentially. We've got 30 minutes before the RAB meeting kicks off. So as you all could see in my email last week, and I think this was noted at the last RAB as well, I've had a couple of interested parties in becoming members of the RAB. One of them being from the Bluffview Sanitary District, Miss Robin Meyer. And then, Michelle, do you want to speak to the Sauk-Prairie Alliance that you had a discussion with?
Yeah, I need to find her name here if you're looking for just a minute. Marla Steele. So Marla Steele is the new executive director of the Sauk-Prairie Conservation Alliance. And the reason that I reached out to her is because, as you see in the email that you were, with the bylaws potentially that we're going to adopt, we had added 2 new entities. And we haven't done that, but that was proposed. So we got to thinking, I had a conversation with Matt, we should probably see if these entities are interested, because we have not actually even discussed this probably for years now. So I reached out to the new executive director, and she's very interested. She does have a board meeting tonight, and she will at least talk to her board. She is former Air Force, and she was active in environmental remediation. So she has an excellent background. It would be a good fit, but that's not here nor there. Because I think what we really need to do tonight is decide how do we handle new positions? How do we handle doing the at-large membership additions? Because we do have a vacancy now. And Matt had actually just looked up the legal code behind it. And what it sounds like we have to do is we just can't add these people. We have to have a membership committee, which we had one, but we haven't, I think, Chris, you were the last person we added, if I remember correctly. So we haven't done that for like 15 years. It's been a really long time.
10 years anyway.
At least 10 years. So we're really rusty. We haven't done it for a while. We did have a membership committee, and I think Laura for sure is on it. I think maybe Mary Carol Solon, but I think probably tonight what we should do is determine, you know, let's get this committee going. Let's ask the Army to advertise for these vacancies, and then the committee can make recommendations to the board and say, this would be a really good organization to pull in, this would be a good person for at-large, or however they want to recommend it. That's kind of how I'm sorry.
So for the community members, that is the process. There is a membership committee. For other agencies to be represented, if you agree the agency should be represented, then the agency decides who their representative will be.
Right.
So we actually have another, we just got a request yesterday to add the Lake Wisconsin Alliance as well. And they couldn't be here tonight, and so I said I would bring it up to you all when you were considering members. But these members that have to do with organizations have a different process than members that are community members. So these are not community members, these are organization representatives, and they are appointed. All the RAD decides is whether that organization deserves to be represented. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So yeah, so Mr. Mike Gleason from the Wisconsin Lake Alliance, or Lake Wisconsin Alliance, also is interested in becoming having his organization a part of it and being a RAB member. So I get that dovetails nicely into our discussion on our operating procedures, but I don't necessarily want to. I don't want to shortchange discussion on these new members, but you guys have the leeway to say, you know, if you all don't want those organizations per se to add those as formal RAB members, they do have the opportunity to join as at-large members.
Well, are we ready for an action on this tonight then?
No.
It's not open for action. Is that what I understand?
That's how I understood Kathy, that it is open for action for adding organizations, but not for at-large members. So that's why I'm a little confused. Am I correct?
Yeah, you should be able to. Okay, so the rule is it gets presented at one meeting, voted at the next. So Bluffview and Sauk-Prairie Conservation Alliance were already proposed multiple times at meetings, and so you can vote to add these or not. The Lake Wisconsin Alliance, we should be having a discussion, and then at the next meeting, you can vote to add them or not.
Okay.
And
the membership for the position, the vacant position for the community member at large is a different situation.
But to me, this
and you are now setting the operating procedures for how you will add those members, those community members. So if you go by your old bylaws, which are in effect still, the 2001 bylaws, I can look here, and I brought it up, hopefully you can see it, and I'll look up members. So you have a limit of 26, and you have so if you decide decide to add these 3, then you need to decide if the limit of how many members you have should change.
How many do we currently have?
You
26?
currently have 21. You have 7 organizations, 7 government, and 7 community at-large members. And it's Ken Lynn's position that is vacant. And I'm sorry, I can't remember if the other, I think you have 2 vacancies. I can't remember if
Yeah, I did.
it's
Yeah,
Mr. Stelling or Mr.
Vern
Wilhelm. One of those no longer participate, I believe.
Yeah, that's Vern Kinchy. I did not know about Ken Lynn's.
Ken Lynn's
Oh, Vern Kinchy?
Yeah,
still
he passed
unconfirmed.
away.
Yeah.
So Vern Kinchy, I did not have him as one of the 7.
Okay.
So the 7 community members are Chris Hansen, Mary Jane Cock, Ken Lyns, Mary Carol Solom, William Stelling, Charlie Wilhelm, and Michelle Hopp.
No.
Those are the 7 at-large members.
No, I'm Village of Merrimack. This is Michelle. I'm Village of Merrimack.
Oh, okay. Then that must be the 7th. Then there are actually 8.
20.
8 government?
No, well, the cities, Baraboo, Merrimack, Prairie du Sac, those.
Yeah, municipalities.
But I think relevant here is we're under the cap.
Right.
So let's not spend time worrying about specific numbers. If there's 2 organizations we can take action on tonight, let's go ahead and do it. Sauk-Prairie Conservation Alliance and the Bluffview Sanitary District. We've talked about these guys for a couple of years, so let's get on with it.
It sounds like a motion, and I'll second. If we're gonna move.
Yeah.
Okay, formally, I make a motion that we add the Sauk-Prairie Conservation Alliance and the Bluffview Sanitary District as rep members.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Okay, so we will send them forms that they fill out that said, that says whether or not they want an alternate or just a permanent member, and then we get the information of who that permanent member is. We also had a motion in the past to add Merrimack Sanitary District. So that needs to be voted on as well. There was discussion against it previously, but I don't think the people from the Merrimack Sanitary District are at the meeting tonight. So you may want to wait until you do the Lake Wisconsin Alliance and do the Merrimack Sanitary District at the same time. It's up to you.
Point of clarification, is that the town of Merrimack Sanitary District?
I'm not a local, so I'm not sure. It was Tim McCumber
It is.
and Mike Fitton who brought it up, but I don't know.
I think they formed.
I think it is back when we were gonna put in a water system, they had to form a sanitary district, which was formed like 5 years ago. And when Tim McCumber left, I'm guessing that the interest in having a representative from the sanitary district went away. I'll have to talk to the town chairman.
Yeah, I would suggest we defer that one.
Yeah. I would agree. The other thought process with that was that the town of Merrimack already has representation. And that was I remember, if I remember correctly, this was years ago, but I think that was the prevalent argument.
Well, and the other argument was that the Buckview Sanitary District is not there as a sanitary district, it's there as a landowner.
Correct. Yep, that's my recollection. Thank
And
you.
there was a suggestion from Laura to actually note that in the list of members that Bluffview Sanitary District landowner,
Yes.
in parentheses.
Yep. Thank
And
you.
did I understand that correctly, Laura?
Yes, because in general, I don't think utilities would be considered eligible, nor would commercial enterprises. And I think if we have all the surrounding utilities asking for, I think we need to make it clear that that particular entity was added because they are a landowner, and with the attention to the settling ponds right now, that seems particularly appropriate. So was the Bluffview Sanitary District, was that a more recent addition? Or is that a proposed addition?
Now that's what you were just voting on, was adding Bluffview and Sauk-Prairie Conservation Alliance.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood. Thank you.
The one we're waiting on is Lake Wisconsin Alliance. It's proposed at this meeting. It will have to wait to the next meeting to be voted on, but it's something for you guys to consider. I can give you more information if you'd like that we received from the request. Or Matt, if you have it, you could read it.
Yes, I do. If y'all are interested now. So this is from Mr. Mike Gleason, who's the president of the Lake Wisconsin Alliance. Let's see. It just generally says, I'm interested in becoming a member of the RAV so that I can get more information regarding the status of the Badger Army Ammunition Plant cleanup. I'm currently the president of the Lake Wisconsin Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization of over 400 members that endeavors to balance the diverse interests of the Lake Wisconsin community while improving water quality, recreational opportunities, and sustaining a healthy ecosystem within the Lake Wisconsin watershed. So that's their mission.
He lives in the area too, I believe.
He is a local resident, yes, and he's been coming for years.
Do we have a motion on the floor? Where are we at?
Well, we have to wait until the next meeting to vote because it has to be proposed at one meeting and voted at the next.
Okay. But well,
But I just wanted people to understand what they would be voting on next time and why the request was made.
no, that's fine.
And then Roger, was it you who said you would check, or who was it, maybe Chris, who said he would check on Merrimack?
That was me, Roger.
Okay, Roger.
Yes, sir.
We need to get an updated list of RAB members. There's a lot of people on here that are no longer
Absolutely.
in positions that.
Yeah. Will do.
Thank you.
There was also something in bylaws about when people don't attend meetings, that they'll be replaced.
That's right.
I just think that we have to, starting at some point in time, enforce that.
Well, one of them is the township of Sumter. I don't think I've ever seen Tim Colby, so I don't think we can eliminate them, but maybe.
You could change
So
your-
the two, Sauk City and Town of Baraboo, we sent them repeated letters asking if they wanted to appoint an individual to represent them on the RAB, and they have not responded.
Well, City of Baraboo is John. He was here last time.
Yep.
Town of Baraboo, so
Oh,
John
I'm
is the City
sorry.
of Baraboo,
Gotcha.
and there's a Town of Baraboo that was listed in your charter.
Okay, thank you.
Town of Sumter representation is here, though.
Pardon?
You said something about Sumter, right?
Yeah, Town of Sumter, I haven't seen Tim Colby as,
On the other
well,
hand,
he's the alternate. But
Doug
But I don't
Jersey.
think you can eliminate him if he doesn't show up.
you don't have to.
Well, and that's, so That was a proposal to the operating procedure. So if we only have 15 minutes left, do we want to start at the top and go through the operating procedures where changes were made and comments received?
Everybody okay with that?
Well,
Sure.
So the Bluffview and Sauk-Prairie, those were the first two mentioned. The next thing mentioned,
Kathy,
I
you can't-
believe, was adding the Dairy Forage Research Center to U.S. Department of Agriculture, because it's not just the U.S. Department of Agriculture who sends a representative. It is specifically the Dairy Forage Research Center. Does anyone have any issues with that?
Kathy, if you're sharing it, we cannot see it in the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you could. My apologies.
Paper copy.
I appreciate that.
Why isn't it coming up?
Thank you.
Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay. So we are right here. It did say U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we received a comment asking us to specifically list the Dairy Forage Research Center. Is there any issues with that?
Well, the Dairy Forage Research Center is a part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I don't know.
Right, but it's the only part that has they're a landowner. So they're the only part that has a vested interest in Badger.
Okay.
Okay, and Dennis Hancock, who is their representative, he posted in the chat, I would like for us to be listed by name. Oh, okay, so Dennis, you're saying it shouldn't even say Department of Agriculture? It should just say U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center? Is that correct?
You could include the US, excuse me, the USDA in there.
Underneath,
But-
like, is a secondary.
Yeah, but it definitely does need to read Dairy Forage Research Center just for clarity purposes.
Okay, so what I have it listed right now is U.S. Department of Agriculture Dairy Forage Research Center. Is that appropriate?
No, put the dairy forage first and the federal second.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah,
could barely hear the person speaking.
That's Mary Carroll.
Mary Carroll. Yeah,
So you're
put the
saying U.S.
forage
Dairy
first.
Forage Research Center, and then maybe in parentheses, Department of Agriculture?
Right.
That's not
Okay.
necessary.
That should make everybody happy.
Okay,
Dennis, is that correct if we do it that way?
I just put in the chat the actual formal name for our center. That's maybe too much for including or not, but I mean, if it's U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center, that will be sufficient. You can add the USDA in there if you would like. You can add the USDA ARS in there if you'd like, but if it's U.S. Dairy Forage Research Center, it is very specific to us, so.
okay.
Yeah, I think we should defer to the agency. So it's correct.
Okay, then, I'm sorry, Laura, I missed one of your earlier comments. So, on paragraph B, right here, the primary goal, you wanted to add "and regulating agencies," which allows for comment on DNR decision documents, for example. We cannot do that. DNR has to follow state rules for any of their things that are out for public review, and we follow federal rules, we follow CERCLA, and so we can't add regulating agencies. The RAB is primarily for the Army to receive feedback. It does allow dialogue with all the regulating agencies, but that is not the primary goal.
So the Army does, as long as we're able to, as a RAB, comment on DNR approval, for example. We would be able to get in formally to do that and take action on it at a RAB meeting. What are you thinking?
I don't want to speak for WDNR. But the RAB gets to review all the Army documents. There is no requirement in CERCLA for the RAB to review other agency documents. Now, I know that the state of Wisconsin has some public participation rules, but that is not what this RAB is for.
Well, the language, it leaves a little wiggle. It says a primary goal, so.
Right, and the primary goal is only for the Army. But if this does provide a forum for you to address issues to the regulating agencies, but that doesn't mean they have to allow you to review their documents. That's by state law, not by RAB rule. So this document is just based on the RAB rule.
So can we put something under section B that paraphrases what you just said? That the RAB may still comment on?
No, so we need to follow the RAB rule, and that is how this came about, this statement.
Okay.
There may be another place somewhere where you can, but we would have to consult with DNR, and it sounds like they're not in the room.
They're here, but.
Yeah, we're here.
They're here.
Okay.
Does DNR have any suggestions for language that maybe could be added someplace else, or?
Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar with how these RAB rules are written, but generally anything that's public record, if you want to comment on it, you're more than welcome to. And if you want to have a group consensus that provides comments, that's also acceptable as well. And if we
Right, that's through the Wisconsin state laws.
Correct, yeah. And if you want, we can try to go look and see if there's anything that would limit that. But if it's public record, it's yours to have and comment on. So.
Okay. So the next comment we had is on paragraph F here. The suggestion is that where it says if a RAB member misses more than 75% of meetings within 3 years, they will be recommended for removal, and the suggestion is to change that to may. And the same suggestion in the first sentence, I'm sorry. If a RAB member misses 3 meetings in a row without explanation, they may be recommended for removal versus will.
The suggestion is to allow for unique situation where, I don't know what the circumstances may be, but we would all agree it's reasonable. And if the operating procedures are that tight, we wouldn't have any allowance for consideration of, some extenuating circumstance. COVID is an example. There is something to prohibit people from, it still retains the authority, but it gives the RAB some latitude for considering special. So, because it says will or shall, that removes that.
So does anybody have any issues with changing those? This one right here and this one right here to may.
Right, but the thing that would remain is that if you were recommended for a removal, they will be notified, and I think that should be mandatory.
Okay, and then this last sentence, RAB members or the parent organization, as applicable, will decide if replacement is needed, and that was changed to may. But I believe that has to be, Will, you need to decide whether or not there should be a replacement. And that's kind of where we are with the situation with those two towns who don't send representatives.
That makes sense.
Okay?
I would support the will. I don't care.
Okay, and then the next edit, just 1 second. All right. I'm sorry, I'm looking at 3 different documents here. The next area is the meetings. Okay. The Army will schedule meetings at least 3 times a year whenever significant information needs to be conveyed or when the community co-chair identifies a need for additional meeting to discuss specific topics. The Army will make every effort to schedule additional meetings. If the Army is unable to travel, other efforts to communicate remotely will be pursued, which is kind of what we're doing now. And all meetings shall be called by the co-chairs. I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure there's a suggested change to this. I just need to find it. Oh no, it's not there. It's a little bit later. So does anybody have any problems with that paragraph A? That was a change to your charter.
We're changing the
No,
2
that
to
sounds
3.
reasonable.
I think
Okay, then meeting announcements.
Can I ask a question about meetings?
Mm-hmm.
It's Roger again. Does the bylaws prohibit the local folks in the RAB to have a meeting without the Army?
Yes, the RAB is not the community members only. The RAB has 3 portions for Badger. It has the government members, it has the community members, and then it has the organizations in city and towns. So there is not a RAB meeting if you don't have representation from all those groups. If the community wants to get together and talk about whatever they want to talk about, that's fine, but it's not the RAB.
I always feel like when we attend these meetings, it's the Army's meeting and the RAB all we do is sit here and listen to what the Army has to say. And it strikes me that the RAB should meet a month before a meeting and put together an agenda that they would like to have on or have some ideas on the agenda that they would like.
So the purpose of the meeting is to provide updated information on the cleanup. So we provide that information. The other purpose is for you all to provide us feedback, but we haven't really had any kind of documents. I mean, you did with the RIFS, if you remember that, Remedial Investigation Feasibility Study, you provided us a lot of input on that.
Yeah.
And so there isn't something to provide input on if we aren't taking an action.
Well, maybe the RAB should be providing input as to the feelings of the people in the communities that are affected by Badger. You know, it's like...
We always ask for that information.
You get it from individuals, but I don't think we do a good job as a RAB to provide that information as a whole, as a community organization. I just feel like we're just here to listen to what the Army has to say.
And the intent is for you to provide us feedback, and the intent is for you to go back to the organization you represent and provide them the information you've heard so you can gather their feedback. And that is something that comes up every time we do a community involvement interviews in this community. The community does not feel representative. When we go out to random people, they don't feel like that their opinions are being represented at these meetings. But that's on the community members to decide how they want to do that, how they want to gather that input. Some other community RABs will have like a Facebook group for the community that they run and they do and they get the feedback from, and then they provide that input to the Army. Some have like a letter writing campaign. Some get together and just chat. Some meet at local city council meetings and things like that. And the RAB member presents what was put out at the RAB and gets the feedback that way. How the RAB community members do that is up to them, but their role is to represent the communities, to provide the Army the community's input.
Okay.
And you can do that at the meeting or in between the meetings. So we are at 6 o'clock when we are supposed to start the other meeting. So we got to meeting announcements. Paragraph E is how far we got.
Thank you,
So,
Kathy.
Matt, it's up to you when you want to do another administrative meeting to finish.
Yeah.
And RAB, when they want to as
So I'm
well.
assuming, it's up to you all, but I'm assuming next time we have a RAB that it would be beneficial to do this again.
I agree.
So we'll do that, we'll plan on that. Okay, I think for the sake of sanity, let's take a 5-minute break. We'll let folks come into the room and get settled, and those who have been here a while, take a quick break. And then, so apologize for all of you just joining, but we'll take about a 5-minute break and get started.
Real quick, is there an agenda for the 6 o'clock meeting?
There is. Well, you want to put that up, Kay?
Okay.
Yeah, it's right there.
Okay, can you still see my screen? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we'll start again in about 5 minutes.
Good. I'm gonna go greet people.
Do you have the same information I have for the last 5 years? Yes. Do you guys still are in Kitchen's vacant position? No, did you put Bluffview on as a member? Oh, I need to go on now? Yeah. But I don't think it's a bad idea. When you don't have, because she had to very close with one person who doesn't have a job. And so she has to run it. Very nice. And it would be nice to, right. Yeah, exactly. And we don't even have that. Yeah, no, I don't think it would be that much. Is there, you think it's different?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with saying it. I think there should be some
break, we'll go ahead and get started with the formal RAB meeting. So, my name is Matt Dayock. I'm with Army Environmental Command. I think you've previously seen Susan Elrod up here. So Susan received her promotion. She now works for Headquarters Department of the Army up at the Pentagon. So her life's changed drastically from Texas living, but we're happy for her, but sad to lose her. So I do have a replacement for her coming on. His name is Mr. Quan Nguyen, and so you'll likely get to know him here going forward in the future. So Quan is a current Army Environmental Command employee. He worked in the Southeast region and has been with us for quite a while and was promoted recently. So he'll be starting with us next week. Michelle, I guess we'll do the quick review of the agenda. We'll do welcome and opening comments. I kind of jumped ahead, I think, a little bit in the slide presentation. A roll call, a review of the last two RAB meeting minutes. I think everybody has seen those a multitude of times, and we've addressed all the issues there, so those should be signed, sealed, and delivered tonight. We'll have a couple of presentations from USGS, and then Joel from Sauk-Prairie will give a quick update to groundwater monitoring that's occurred since the last RAB, and then I'll wrap it up with some project management updates as to where we are on a number of topics as far as moving the cleanup forward here at Badger, and then we'll review our future meeting schedule and then wrap up the evening. So, sorry, Michelle. I'll now turn it over to you to.
There's not much more for me to say, but just introduce myself. I'm Michelle Hopp, the community co-chair of the RAB, and I just am grateful that you all decided to come here tonight. And please give your input, because that's what we need. We want to hear what people want to talk about, know more about. So again, welcome.
Thanks. I think we can skip ahead. I'm not sure who's controlling the slides. We can skip ahead 2 slides to the roll call. And so we'll touch base with those that joined since the administrative meeting.
Okay, we can just go through the list. Okay, so Michelle Hopp is here. John Ellington.
Here.
Okay. Laura Ola is here. Wendy Carlson.
Here.
Okay, Randy is here. Valerie McAuliffe is here. Doug Durston is here. Roger Heidenreich is here. Craig Walsh.
Here.
Dennis Hancock is here. Autumn Ludke. Curtis Hedman is here. Luke Lampo.
Here.
Isaac Ross is here. Charlie Wilhelm is here. Chris Hansen is here. Mary Carol Sullum is here. Mary Jane Koch.
She's absent.
And William Staling. Okay, that's it.
I think we have probably some guests online that haven't introduced themselves, and then in the room as well. So, if your name wasn't called, would you mind introducing yourself, please, so those online can hear that you're here?
Brenda Murphy, managing member.
Hi, everybody. I can start. I'm usually at the top, giving on an A. Shelley Allness. I'm with the Department of Natural Resources. I'm the new field integration leader covering the 11 counties in the South Central region, and happy to be here listening. Wanted to be there in person, but it just didn't work out, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Meg Hazarat with the USGS, working on the groundwater flow and transport model here, and I believe my colleague Howard Reeves is on as well, and might have a couple other members of the modeling team join.
Okay, and we heard you.
I see Marina.
Hi, yeah, my name is Marina Metis. I'm also with the USGS out of the Maryland Water Science Center, and I'll be presenting on the website that we created to be able to look at the groundwater results and the plume boundaries.
Matt?
Yes, excuse me. Also with USGS, I'm Matt Padrowski. I'm with the Maryland office also,
and I'll do a brief presentation on the study that was published last year on the assessment of trends in the plumes.
And then Howard, you've already been called out, but I didn't know if you want to speak.
Oh, thanks. I'm here.
Is there anybody else who didn't get called who wants to introduce themselves?
Anybody in the room?
Yeah, we have some in the room.
Yeah.
And Brenda, you didn't get to finish.
That's okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Managing member for Welch's Bay, one of the property owners.
Welch's Bay, okay. Anybody else?
I'm Robin Meyer, Bluffview Sanitary District.
Okay.
Who will be a member at the next meeting since we voted on that.
Thank you.
Could you speak up again? Sorry about that.
Calvin Goldberg with Congressman Spokana's office.
Okay, thank you.
Joel Jansen with Spec-Pro, contractor for the Army.
Okay. Are you all? Go ahead.
I don't know if you want us to introduce yourself.
Sure.
I'm Lizzie. I work for Joel at Spec-Pro.
Okay.
And I'm Kendra. I also work for Joel.
Okay. Anybody else? I think that's everyone.
All right, thank you all. So moving to the topic of meeting minutes. So we have before us the 7 October meeting minutes and the 21 April meeting minutes. I believe everybody has seen those a few times, and we received comments and incorporated those. I think the most recent comments we received were from Mr. Hanson, and we responded to that late last week and amended the meeting minutes to provide some clarity. So the RAB is not technically, it's not part of the charter to actually vote on the meeting minutes, but we certainly want to make sure everybody is on board with them and concurs. So any other final information or comments on those meeting minutes from the last two restoration advisory boards?
This is Laura. Are you certain the October ones were also circulated for comment? I know I commented on April.
They were previously, yes.
Okay. Well, I'll need a copy afterwards, but I'm sure it's
Yeah,
fine.
so they were, when Susan was chairing, she sent them out, but you all weren't ready to vote on them at the April meeting, and so she said we would just vote on them at this meeting.
Okay.
And you can download them off the website, or we can send them to you.
Thank you, that'd be great.
Yeah, I've got comments on the April one. I got a response from you on my suggestions, and I'm not totally satisfied with the revised version. As you say, that is why the Army tests community private wells. A number of residential wells are sampled regularly. I would suggest we say a limited number of residential wells are sampled regularly, because it's not nearly all of them. Sure. And then when you go on to say there are a number of people who have received bottled water, there are a number of people who have received replacement wells, we know exactly how many that is. Rather than use a number of, just say 3 wells have been replaced, or 5 wells have been replaced, or whatever it is.
Sure.
Okay? That's my suggestion on that.
So, Joel, how many residents do we sample?
Next month, we're doing 58.
So, if you could add that, Kay, to the minutes, be specific, 58. And Joel, how many wells have we replaced?
It's either 7 or 8, right?
I think we're at 7.
I'm having a brain freeze right now. I'll come up with it later. Sorry.
So we'll update the minutes with those specific numbers.
Thank you.
And then you're okay to publish them?
Yes.
So, how about as a follow-up to that, on the 58 residential wells that are tested regularly, what does regularly mean? Once a year? You know, how many are tested every 6 months? How many are tested once a year? I think that would be good to know.
58 are tested annually. 2 of those are tested quarterly.
So there's 56 annual, 2 quarter.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments, input to the meeting minutes? So Mr. Hanson, you have comments on the 20, or the October meeting minutes as well?
No, just the April.
Just April, okay, all right. Sounds good. All right, thank you. We'll move forward with addressing those final comments and finalizing them. All right, so at this time, Matt introduced himself a little bit earlier, but as you're all aware, USGS did do an analysis and report looking at contaminant trends in plumes and wells as part of the Badger Army Ammunition Plant groundwater monitoring network. So this is, I think you've all been part of this process along the road for the last couple of years, and this was one of the requested topics from last RAB meeting. So Matt's going to give an overview of the work that they did and the findings from that work. So turn it over to Matt. Thanks, Matt, for being here.
Okay, thank you. I am attempting to share my screen, so hopefully you see a PowerPoint presentation right now.
We can see it. Can you maximize it?
Yes.
Okay.
Put it into
Presentation mode.
presentation mode. Hopefully, there. Is that better?
Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, yes, we were asked by the Army Environmental Command to take a look at the water quality data that had been collected historically. I think it was back in 2017 when we started on this project, and so the result of that was this report that the front cover here is shown on the slide. It came out as a USGS Scientific Investigation Report number 2020-5106, and it was released, I think it was April of 2021 when the final report was published. I have spoken to the group before, so thank you for having me back. During the course of the study, I presented some preliminary results at a couple of meetings. So I'm not going to go into as much detail on this and try to focus on some key results. Can't seem to get it to advance. Okay.
Try page down.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, so what I'd like to go over today is just kind of briefly give the background for the study, summarize some of the key results from the two parts of the study. The way I see it is the plume delineations and then the statistical analysis of the trends. Talk a little bit about the optimization results and focus more on what I'm calling the areas where new wells would reduce uncertainty, and this kind of will lead into the Army's discussion later about potentially adding some additional wells for monitoring. So, our overall approach in this was to do a reanalysis of existing water quality data. And at the time, we had data available from the year 2000 up through October of 2018. So those are the data that we focused on. As I had just mentioned, we've had kind of two complementary approaches. That was redelineating the plume boundaries for various contaminants of concern throughout that period from 2000 through 2018. And then also doing a statistical analysis of this water quality data to test whether or not we were seeing any statistically significant trends either in the overall mass and size of the plumes or any trends that were noticeable in concentrations in individual wells. So just as kind of a reminder, there are other contaminants at the site, but these 7 contaminants of concern were identified, and they're the ones that we focused on because those are the most commonly encountered at the site, and really looking at these tends to characterize the plumes sufficiently. And there are some other, for instance, DNT contaminants that occasionally pop up, but they're not as prevalent. So these are the contaminants of concern for this particular study. We identified 7 of them, but you'll see from this table that not all of them are present in all of the plumes. For instance, ethyl ether has not been encountered in the central plume or in the deterrent burning ground plume. It's only been detected in wells in the propellant burning ground plume. So not every contaminant was looked at for every plume. I guess before I get too much further into it, I just want to remind everybody that you may have seen these depth intervals before. It was very useful for us to look at the water quality data from the wells by grouping the wells according to their approximate depth intervals. And these depth intervals were established previously by Sauk-Prairie in some of their reports, and we used the same intervals. There are not, they're linked A through F. There's no hard and fast depth that defines the top and the bottom of each interval. They kind of change over the site, but generally what we're seeing is that the A interval is at or directly beneath the water table, where you first encounter groundwater. The E interval is the depth just above bedrock, and then B, C, and D are basically about a third of the way down, halfway down, and 2/3 of the way down between the top of the water table and bedrock. And then there were a few wells that we had in the F interval, which are bedrock wells. Most of the analysis really focused on A through E. There really weren't enough wells in the bedrock to either perform plume delineations or statistical analyses. And I guess I'll note that these wells include monitoring wells on site and off site, as well as any residential wells that had available water quality data, and which we could determine what depth they were at. There were some wells in the database for which we could not pinpoint the depth, and so we had to disregard those. So I'm not going to show all the plume delineations because there are 16 different plates with 4 maps on each one, so we wouldn't have enough time for that. I will show a few of them just to point out some points of interest later in the presentation, but in just making some general observations about the plume delineations, I think, well, first I want to point out that we did this for 4 time intervals. We kind of grouped the results in 3-year intervals. So from 2000 to 2002, from 2005 to 2007, 2010 to 2012, and then 2015 to 2018. And we wanted to show a progression, or hopefully we wanted to see if there was a progression in changing and the plume shapes and sizes changing over that time period. The reason we kind of grouped it in we lumped them in 3-year periods was to make sure that we had enough observations to be able to draw the plume. The further back you go, not every well was sampled in every year, and so by grouping them, we had a greater number of points to choose from. That said, I think one of the key things we noticed is that the plume areas were generally decreasing for each of the 3 plumes, and for all of the the contaminants. And the only exception to that over this this long time period from 2002 to 2018 was for ethyl ether in the propellant burning ground plume, which did show an apparent increase. If you just look at the two plumes that we did delineate there for 2 time periods, it was slightly larger in 2015, 2018 than it was actually 2010, 2012 period. That may reflect an actual increase in size, but it may also reflect just that there's a long interval, a great distance where there are no wells available, and so a slight increase in a downgraded well resulted in us interpolating a larger area for that particular plume, and I'll point that out on another slide later on. Another key observation was that there were some areas where the plume boundaries were less certain, and that is where on one side of the boundary we had a detection, and then there were no wells nearby that we could. The wells were far away. The closest well was relatively far away, so there are no close wells where we could say, okay, the line of the plume boundary should be right in here. So where there were kind of no close by wells, we dashed the lines of the plume boundaries to indicate where we thought there was some uncertainty. And I will point out where some of those are, because they relate to where we think you could improve the certainty of the plume delineations if we had some additional wells in these particular areas. And some of those areas I think are, well, for various reasons, maybe of more interest than others, and we'll get to that. The other half of our analysis was the statistical analysis of the trends, and we did statistical analysis in 2 ways. We looked at concentrations in each individual well, and then tested it to see if there was a discernible trend in that particular well. But then we also looked at the overall concentration data over time for groups of wells for each contaminant in each plume, and did a statistical analysis as a group to see if there was a trend that could be determined for the overall plume. The analysis would provide us basically an output of whether the mass of the plume was increasing, decreasing, stable, or no trend detectable. I guess the other result sometimes was that there just wasn't enough, there were not enough observations with detections to do the statistical analysis. That kind of means we just did, there's kind of a minimum critical mass of observations that you need in order to be statistically significant. I think of it in terms of like if somebody does a political poll, they always, there's a minimum number of people that they ask. You need to ask 1,000 or 1,500 people, and then that's a reasonable sample. If you don't have enough people, then there's too much possible variation in the answers, and you can't really trust it. And that's why they usually put some error bars around those poll results. So I think of it in the same way. When we're looking at doing these statistical analyses, it's not that there was not a lot of water quality data out there. It was just for a given plume and a given contaminant at a given time period, were there enough observations that had results associated with them that met the minimum, which was usually, I think, maybe 6 observations, or maybe it was 4 observations in a group of 6 wells. If you didn't have these 6 wells, then it was not considered valid.
Looks like we have a question.
That said, no, sure.
Yeah, it looks like we have a question.
Yes.
Laura?
What is the difference between increasing in mass versus increasing in concentration?
Okay.
Different.
So, you know, if the concentration is given in parts per, well, in this case, parts per million, generally, and so that represents in a given volume of sample, how many, what's the, how many parts of that sample are the contaminant versus, well, the matrix, the rest of the water. Whereas the mass of the contaminant is really an estimate that is made of how much contaminant is in that plume. Think of it in terms of just maybe grams or kilograms of contaminant. So you would, the algorithm we used basically was looking at all of the concentration data, which is given in these parts per million, and then comparing it over the volume of the plume that was being assessed based on the distribution of the wells that we were looking at, and then kind of translating that into mass instead of concentration. And so the change in mass would have been overall, I'll make up a number. If there were 100 kilograms of contaminant in the year 2000, and then later on it decreased, the mass maybe is only 80 kilograms over that entire plume for that contaminant. Now, so concentrations in one well could be going up and another well going down. So this method attempts to balance all that out and kind of look at the overall mass of the contaminant.
So overall, it's fair to say increasing mass generally results in increasing concentration, but not necessarily.
Right.
Okay, that's
yeah,
all.
Yeah.
That's all I need. Thank you.
Right. So, in an ideal world, if all of the concentrations increased, yes, you would see all the mass increasing. If all the concentrations decreased, you'd see all the mass decreasing. But the devil's in the details, so if some increase and some decrease, it's a little trickier, and that doesn't necessarily hold.
Okay, that answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Matt,
So,
I'm sorry, Matt, we have one question in the room as well. Sorry.
Okay, certainly. I can't see hands because I'm looking at my screen, so somebody will have to point that out.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Should I
Yeah.
sit somewhere else?
If you want to walk up closer to the microphone, I think that would help.
Where's the microphone?
Just anywhere up in here is fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
anything.
Just a detailed question, I suppose. You mentioned earlier a critical threshold for minimum observations in a given well. Do you have that top of mind? What is that threshold of observations?
Off the top of my head, it's in the report, and I can check on it for you.
Thank you.
What was your name, ma'am?
I'm Kate.
Kate?
Thompson.
Okay, thank you.
I did put a link to the report under the resources tab of the website. And in the chat of this, I put the link to the website.
Okay, thank you.
Matt, we got one more question. Sorry.
Another question? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Hansen here. I've got a question on the central plume, and my concern here is the messaging that might be going out to the public. We say that we can't analyze the central plume. That's not totally true. It's just that this statistical analysis, there isn't enough data to do that. But I want to make sure that the USGS is not saying that we don't have a handle on at least the areal extent of the central plume.
That's a good point. Yeah, trying to give a summary here, and what I mean by this under central plume, where there were an insufficient number, it just means that we did not meet the minimum threshold number of observations of detections of any of the contaminants in order to do this particular statistical analysis. Certainly, we did plume delineations, and so that other method of assessing the plumes was adequate, or was, what I guess I should say, was feasible. And we were able to do statistical analysis on individual wells in the central plume, and those are presented in the report as well. So, yeah, I didn't mean to imply that we have no ability to analyze the plume. Just for this analysis of trends in the plumes, there were not enough detections.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I got.
So.
Could I ask a question?
No.
Sure.
No. So I guess what it may go into Kate's question, but that makes me think that we're not testing enough wells, maybe? That's kind of what I'm looking at there, and I'm a little concerned, I probably should have known this, but that we're just testing 58 wells a year. Is that enough to be able to statistically show what's going on?
That's just residential wells, if you know. So there's many, many more, and Joel, I don't know if you know the number off the top of your head.
So Michelle, the 58 is just the residential wells that are sampled in August.
Okay.
So the central plume, like Chris's question would be is that the central plume, the majority of the wells are sampled once a year. There are some wells that are sampled twice a year, and so I think he just had a few data points, and especially at the time frames that he was looking at, the central plume wasn't important enough to sample a lot of wells, and it's becoming more and more important over the last 10 years. So I think some of those analyses were struggling to find enough data. Is that a good way to say that?
Yes, Amir.
And keep in mind that this is just one tool. This statistical analysis that we did is one way to look at all of the data that have been accumulated over the years. And so I don't think it's accurate to say that because we couldn't do this particular analysis, that there are not enough wells being sampled to understand what's going on with the plume. As I pointed out, we tried a couple of different ways to understand what's going on with the plume. There is the plume delineations. There was this analysis of trends in plumes, and then there was the analysis of trends in individual wells. And those are three different ways, but even those aren't the only way to look at this. I think they're all very useful, or can be useful. So, to answer the question, do we have enough wells? I guess the follow-up is always enough wells to do what, and so that I think that you have to start looking at more than just the statistical requirements for this analysis. You have to start looking at where are those wells located, what's downgrading of those wells, what do we know about the movement of the plume already? A lot of questions that don't come into play when we're running the software that does this statistical analysis. So I think we just have to keep an open mind about how we determine what are enough wells in any particular plume or in any particular part of the plume. And I think we'll touch on that a little bit more in the evening. If you want to hold on to that question, and I think it's a legitimate question to keep in mind. How many wells do we have, and are they enough?
Looks like we have one
Hey,
more.
Joel, how many wells do we sample each year?
Is that a monitoring or a residential question?
Monitoring. So we already know residential, we talked about those. What are the monitoring wells? Do you have that number?
Let me look at I'd have to look it up.
Or an estimate?
Just under 200.
Okay, that's what I thought, thank you.
Could everyone hear that? It was just under 200.
It's under 200.
Yeah.
It's probably closer to 150, but we have them at all different times of the year, so it becomes challenging to, I have a spreadsheet, so.
Well, and the groundwater reports are also on the web so that you can see, and then we're going to go through the USGS story map or I forget what they call it, geo narrative, and that also can show you how many wells.
Okay, thank you. All very good questions. So these are the main points that I pulled out of the report in terms of the analysis that we did on the plumes. And we have just discussed the central plume. Really could not complete the analysis for any of the contaminants there. But for the propellant burning ground plume, these are the notable observations that. I guess I should mention here, for doing the statistical analysis, we looked at two different time periods, from 2000 to 2012, and then from 2013 to 2018. We chose that break point because there were some changes made to the monitoring network in 2013, between 12 and 13, and so we thought that you may see some differences due to certain wells being dropped and other wells being added for that second time period. So all of our analyses were kind of done for each contaminant, for each plume, for two different time periods. So so you see here that in the early time period, 2000 to 2012, the carbon tetrachloride in the propellant burning ground plume was increasing in mass. But again, it was only for the D layer. Again, we were looking at not just each contaminant in each plume, but also layer by layer, which also contributes to limiting the number of wells that are available. So, our reason for doing that was that we know that the concentrations, for instance, propellant burning ground plume, it starts off shallow near the source area and gets deeper as it moves away from the Army ammunition plant. So, if at any given point we didn't want to compare the A level and the E level because we know there are going to be differences. There are places where it has the contaminants have dropped down far enough that wells in the A layer and B layer are clean, and it's the deeper ones. So we wanted to, try to compare apples to apples, as it were, looking one slice of the aquifer at a time. I think that that was a good decision in terms of trying to, isolate what's going on in different layers of the aquifer, but it does necessarily mean that we're limiting the number of. We may have nearby wells that are in a different layer, but if they're not in the same layer, we can't count them. So that goes into part of that problem with not having the sufficient number of detections. So again, it was only the D layer where we saw carbon tetrachloride increasing from 2000 to 2012. The other contaminants were either stable, decreasing, or no trend detected. And in the second time period, we didn't see an increasing trend in mass for any of the contaminants in the propellant burning ground plume. That is pretty consistent when you compare that to our plume delineations. When we look at the area of each plume, the plumes seem to be getting smaller. So it was good to see that our two different approaches kind of came up with the same result. The deterrent burning ground plume, the notable kind of takeaway that I got from it was in the first time period, we did see increasing mass for two of the dinitrotoluene constituents, the 2,4-DNT and 2,6-DNT. And that was in the A layer, which is the shallowest layer. And I guess that's not a surprise that you would see that increasing. It's closest to the source. But in the second time period, again, we didn't see an increasing trend in mass for any of the contaminants in any of the layers for the deterrent burning ground plume. So if some of them were stable, some were decreasing, or no trend. Now, I mentioned that we looked at individual wells. We've got results for hundreds of wells. I think we just learned that a few minutes ago that there are somewhere between 150 and 200 wells that are being sampled each year. This year, going back to the year 2000, there were nearly 500 wells that we were able to use in this analysis, because there were old wells that have since been abandoned, particularly monitoring wells on site that were considered redundant. So we had a lot more wells available than just the 200. So looking at all of those wells, we did an analysis of the trend of the concentration in each well individually. These show up in 14 maps in the report. Again, I'm not going to hit every map, but basically the results were similar, similar in character, in that we would either see an increasing concentration, stable, decreasing, or no trend. Yes. So the trends for wells, there was no, I don't know if there was any clear pattern, or no simple pattern, I should say. I will say that generally there were more decreasing trends than increasing trends for most of the contaminants of concern. Two exceptions that I've noted here. In the 2013-2018 period, more wells had an increasing trend for the 2,6-DNT than had a decreasing trend. And in the 2004-2012 period, more wells had an increasing trend for ethyl ether than a decreasing trend.
We have a question here in person.
On that last
Sure.
slide, when it says individual wells, does that mean residential, monitoring, or a combination of both?
That would be both. Yeah. I'm using the term individual as opposed to the overall plume, not meaning it's an individual person's well. So yeah, some of those were residential wells, some of those were monitoring wells. And the well locations are shown on that series of maps, and they're kind of color coded so that if you see a red dot, it'll be an increasing trend in that well. Yellow was, I can't remember the code now, but you'll see that they're color coded. They're not coded to tell you whether it was a monitoring well or if it was a residential well, but you can pretty much tell that from where they're located on the map. Okay, so another analysis that we did was, an exercise at optimization, and what I mean by that is trying to optimize the sampling network so that it is giving reliable and representative results. Part of optimization is getting those representative results without extra effort. And so we did look at whether or not either wells could be eliminated from being sampled at all, or if we needed new wells in a particular area. And we also looked at, for individual wells, whether or not the frequency with which it was being sampled could be reduced. And this was all, a statistical analysis of the data. So it was not, it was objective. It was not a subjective exercise. So basically what the algorithm would do is kind of, for a given plume and a given contaminant, it would look at what is the information that we're getting from this well, and if we remove that well from the network, how does that affect the ability to understand what's going on with the plume if that well were not sampled, or if it were sampled less frequently? So, for instance, if you were getting the same result from a well and it was always, less than the exceedance standard several times a year, then the recommendation will be, well, for that contaminant, you can sample it less frequently because you're not gaining any new information by sampling it 4 times that you wouldn't know by sampling it 1 time. Those results were really quite complicated because we did it for each individual contaminant, and so the sampling frequency recommendations were all over the board in terms of for a given well, you might be able to reduce the frequency for one contaminant, but not for the other contaminants. That's in a big table in the report. However, for none of the wells did we get a recommendation that the sampling frequency should be reduced for all of the contaminants. We had discussed that with the Army before, and basically they said they weren't interested in reducing the frequency for one contaminant and not another. If you're going out there to sample the well, you might as well just run the analysis for the other contaminants as well. So no practical recommendation came out of it for reducing sampling frequency, but the information is there if somebody wanted to revisit it in terms of reducing the frequency of sampling for a specific contaminant. Now, the optimization of what I call the spatial optimization of the wells, there were some wells that were identified as being redundant. I'm going to show figure 20 in a minute, so we'll see exactly where those are. 6 wells specifically from the 2013 to 2018 time period that basically, the results were, hey, there's a well or several wells nearby that are providing similar information, so these can probably be reduced. And then again, I'll show you where those are in a minute. The analysis also had the ability to identify areas where there were gaps. At least, it had a statistical way of doing that. It did not identify any areas where it thought there were gaps where new wells were needed. Now, that said, in addition to the statistical analysis, we considered the uncertainty of some of the plume delineations and really made a decision that those are areas where new wells could reduce uncertainty. So there are areas identified that were not identified by the statistics, but that were identified basically just by our own logic that we think important information could be gained by adding wells in certain areas. All right, so the 6 wells I mentioned that were providing redundant information, all of these were in the propellant burning ground plume, and they are marked with an X. Actually, there were 6 that were in the later time period, and 4 additional ones in the earlier time period. These X's are supposed to be different colors, so it's a little hard to see here. It's easier to see in the report itself. But I think, regardless of which are the 6, you'll see that they're all on former plant property, and they're all, for the most part, near the source area of the plume, and all of them related to the propellant burning ground plume. So none of them are in areas that are near residential wells. So I feel fairly confident that those wells could be reduced, could be eliminated potentially, and the information gained from those wells is being reproduced basically by other nearby wells. That's something that, you know, we would suggest that the Army could look at as potential reduction in their network without losing valid points for understanding what's going on with the plume. Again, you know, this was only in the propellant burning ground plume. We ran into the same, into the problem of not having sufficient number of data points for doing this analysis in the central plume or the deterrent burning ground plume. It's had different threshold criteria for this analysis. So the other way we looked at where you might need wells was by looking at these areas of uncertainty. So this is the tail end of the propellant burning ground plume. The particular plume that's shown here is the trichloroethane, but this holds true for the carbon tetrachloride, the 2,6-dinitrotoluene, and the total dinitrotoluene too. And the phenomenon here is that the southernmost wells, I'm not sure if you guys can see my cursor moving around, but I'm hovering over these two red dots that are almost on top of each other, and they're labeled PBN 9101C and PBN 9001D. Those wells are towards the tail end of the plume, and they are in the respectively the C and D layers, and they exceed the standard at that location. However, there's nothing down gradient in the C and D layer, no wells down gradient. So there's just no way for us to interpolate in between those downgraded wells and the Wisconsin River. And so we've left this as a dashed line. You can see there are two F-layer wells, bedrock wells, that have been sampled in the past and I believe came up clean, but nothing in the C and D. So what this finding gets at is that putting additional wells down gradient of these two would allow us to interpolate and know better, you know, what's going on. I'm going to point out one more thing, which is that this shaded area is the plume that was delineated by Sauk-Prairie, and I think it was in 2014 report that we put down for comparison. And you might say, well, why is their plume going down to the river and ours isn't? They incorporated other data, water quality data, that we did not have at the time. There were borings that were put in between DNC and the Wisconsin River. They weren't completed as wells. They were just, there's a boring put in, they take a sample of water, the boring is sealed, filled back up and sealed. And so it was kind of a one-time sampling event, and Sauk-Prairie used that one-time sampling event to determine that, yes, there were exceedances within this area, and that's how they delineated that plume. We chose not to use the data from those single event borings because our overall approach was looking at these data that were recurring in wells over a longer period of time. So it would be interesting to see what is going on in that area now. Yeah, so not any questions on that. I'll move to the next one.
Looks like there is
I have
one
a question.
Matt.
All right.
Go ahead, Laura.
Question?
Yes, I'm looking at the gold colored dots up north of the dam, and it says where it says E a lot, so this is indicating residential wells.
This group of wells that are kind of like a brown copper color to me, and maybe they're I don't know, brown or bronze. Generally those are all residential wells. There may I'm not sure if there's some monitoring wells in there, but generally they're residential, and that color means that the concentrations were less than the PAL, which is the preventive action limit. basically
Oh.
a non-detection.
Okay, so this is not having to do with depth, like the ABCD that you showed before?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I misunderstood your question. I was answering an entirely different question about what the color means. But yes, to answer your question, the C, the E, the D, next to one of those dots, that represents the layer where that well is open. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So my
Sorry about
question is, in that's all right. So in the plume area to the south, which is indicated by the line, shadowed kind of area, would it be a good idea do we have an E well down there? If a lot of the wells in the area are E, do we have an E well?
Yeah, you can see like way down at the bottom, kind of
Right.
fairly far away, there's an E well that had been sampled in the past.
Not only cooperation or comparing them with residential wells, but also testing this theory of going underneath the river. If that plume is getting shallower or deeper, maybe you're going to talk about that later, but it was interesting to me to see all these E's, and yet down where the plume is, I don't see a lot of E's down there. Do you follow me?
I do see what you're saying, and I will have to check. I'm not certain that there are no E wells down here.
Okay. We can move on. I just wanted to ask the question. You can get back to it.
Okay, I'm just going to write myself a question. All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Another area where we were uncertain about the plume and their dashed lines was really near the source area of the propellant burning ground plume. So this illustrates it for carbon tetrachloride. There are kind of two concentric plumes drawn here. This, I'm tracing now a heavy blue line. Whoop. Careful not to click. A heavy blue line, which represents anything within that line would be over the exceedance standard. There's a broader dashed line outside of that, and that represents the preventive action limit, which is about, I think it's 1/10 of the exceedance standard. So in this case, what we found is that in the A layer, you've got a few wells here that are exceeding, and so we know that the concentrations are high in that area, but there was an A well over here, and I just think it was not sampled in this later time period. And so without having anything off to the side, we end up having to basically draw this dash line saying, this is our best guess. We don't know what's going on in the A layer because we don't have a well there. You can see that also towards the southern end of this plume. The carbon tetrachloride plume is there's an area here where it's above the exceedance standard, and then there's some wells in between where it's below, and then again there are a few wells where it's above. This probably, if I had to guess, relates to the fact that for a number of years the IRM, the interim remediation system was running, the pump and treat system, and so that probably has to do with how the plume is attenuated here and broken into like two different areas of higher concentration and then lower concentration outside of that. But if you see with this lower area, again on the western side, we're a little uncertain there as well. This is again near the source area. And again, this shows up only in the 2015-2018 data. Now, we're simply pointing out that another well in this area would help to delineate the plume. I think it would be up to the Army to decide priorities as to would it be more useful to have wells in downgrading areas or upgrading areas. because we have a lot of information about what's going on in the upgrading area. We know the general direction of groundwater flow and the direction of the plume that it's taken over the last decades. And so I guess what I'm saying is it's not necessarily a recommendation that, hey, you need a well here, as it is just identifying that it's a little less certain what this plume boundary is without a well there. But is that as important as other things? I think that all has to be balanced. Another area of uncertainty, again, this is the same propellant burning ground plume. And here it's really all three of the dinitrotoluene constituents, 2,4, 2,6, and the total dinitrotoluene. It's the same situation or similar situation in that we've got a lot of wells with high concentrations, and then this symbol with the hatch mark says that it was not sampled during this period. So, A, B, and C not being sampled here led to uncertainty about where this plume boundary is. Was there a question?
I don't think so. I think you're good.
Okay. All right.
A reminder
Now,
that
moving
we've
back.
got about 20 minutes left in the scheduled meeting. So.
Okay, I'm sorry. Well, there were a lot of good questions. I only have a couple more slides, so we should get through this in the next 3 or 4 minutes. I'm back looking at the tail end of the propellant burning ground plume, and this is the carbon tetrachloride. This is a slightly different issue than these C and D wells not having anything between them and the Wisconsin River. In this case, up in this area towards the residential wells, there are no D-layer wells in this general state. There's one here that's yellow, which means that it's below the exceedance standard, and that's why it's outside of the plume boundary. But we don't have any more in this general area, and so again, it's hard to say where this boundary should be drawn, and that's why we've extended it all the way up here, kind of to be conservative. But it may actually be closer. If you put a well in here, you would have information to tell you that. And this is a different type of issue. It's not a plume boundary line that we thought was uncertain, as much as it's the fact, and I alluded to this earlier, that for the ethyl ether plume, you've got wells that are just south of the former plant boundary, and then the nearest wells are way down by the state road, and so there's a long distance where we just don't know what's going on in between, and so we have to interpolate over a long distance, and that's why the plume boundary for the PAL, the preventive action limit, is so big. It may be smaller. If we had wells closer in, that would help us. So that's one area that could be considered for another well. Those wells would also serve to warn if the plumes that are associated with this area, the source area, are migrating southward. So a couple of reasons why you might want to have a well somewhere between the southernmost existing ones and the wells that are along the road. And then I just have this one to look at the deterrent burning ground plume. 2 areas of uncertainty. And these occur again in 2015 to 2018 data. One is at the tail end of the plume, meaning the leading edge. And you'll see in this time period that in the sea layer, we've got concentrations exceeding the standard. But we don't have wells in the sea layer down gradient of that to be able to constrain where this line should go. And so we've dashed it. So it would be useful to have a well anywhere down gradient of where this current plume is identified, somewhere in this vicinity, to inform whether there's movement, increase in concentrations, down gradient. The other area of uncertainty is, again, the source area. And this area of uncertainty shows up in the 2015-2018 data. It's not in some of the earlier data, and that's because previously there were other wells, such as this ABC cluster that I'm pointing to, and other upgrading wells that have since they're not sampled any longer. And that was a decision, I'm sure, that was made because they were upgrading it. We don't expect the contaminants to move that way. We've got somewhat of a handle on the upgrading end, and so some of these wells were discontinued. Technically, we looked at that and said, well, we should dash this line because it's uncertain. I don't think that necessarily means we need more sampling up there. Occasional sample and ones that from these nearby wells is probably sufficient. All right, so that is it for my presentation. I think that was it Kathy that said she put the link up, but here it is. I'm just repeating it here. So you can go to this link to the USGS Pubs Warehouse, find the report, find the the report has the text and a lot of the illustrations, but there's a separate document that is the plates with all the plume delineation, so you want to get that separately. And then there's also a data release. It has all of our data that we used in all of the analyses. So, if anybody wanted to look at those data themselves, they could. But this is, I guess, a good lead-in to Marina's presentation, because all of those data that we looked at, well, not all of them, the more recent data for all of the wells that we looked at, we incorporated into the story map, into the geo-narrative, and Marina is going to walk us through what that story map looks like and how to interact with it so that you can explore for yourself on the internet what the plumes look like over time, and you can also explore for yourself what the concentrations are doing in individual wells or groups of wells for contaminants that you choose or plumes that you choose to look at.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Marina, we'll turn it over to you for the geo-narrative demonstration.
Okay, great. All right, can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I noticed Kathy put a link on the website to this too. I can put it in the chat as well. But this URL is public, and so anyone can, access this and look it over after the meeting. So I'll just kind of give a brief overview of the different components and, just show some of the functionality of some of the interactive maps. And so this is all just kind of a, partly a summary of everything that Matt, or parts of the study that Matt went over. We kind of have it broken up into these 4 different sections, and so the introduction just kind of goes through a bit about how to use this website. And so it's basically just like a website where you can scroll down, and as you keep scrolling, it'll go to these different sections. You can also, at this banner at the top, you could just click directly to a particular section if you want to, skip through the background, or, if you're just interested in looking at the plume boundaries. We'll just go back to the top. I won't get into any of the backgrounds. I'm sure you're all very familiar with a lot of the background information at this site. But you kind of just, keep scrolling down, and some different features on this map here on the right will pop up as you're scrolling down. This is an interactive map, and so you can click on it, and we don't have any information on this particular map associated with the monitoring wells, but you can click on the different layers and get some more information about them. You can zoom in, you can pull up the legend on the side here. And so As you keep scrolling down, the bottom of the background section also has these little buttons that will link directly to the report that Matt went over, and then also the data that we used to conduct this study. And so that's all kind of right there for you. And so we really focused on just highlighting the plume boundary delineations, especially because there were so many of them, because we looked at each individual contaminant for these 4 different time periods. And, you know, for some contaminants, all 3 plumes had plume boundaries. And so, you know, we just wanted to be able to kind of show them individually and allow people to kind of explore the plume boundaries a little bit more. And so just as you scroll down, it goes through each contaminant individually, starting with the DNTs. And this is just like an animation scrolling through the different time periods. But then if you continue to scroll down, it'll pull up another interactive map. And again, you can kind of zoom in, you can click on the boundary to pull up additional information, and so you can see the time period, and then Matt had talked about the uncertainty in some of the plume boundary delineations, and so you can see, you know, where we have areas of the boundary that we do have more certainty versus areas that are delineated as an uncertain plume boundary through these dotted lines. And so now this is showing the 2005 to 2007 time period. And we have the original time period that we looked at from 2000 to 2002 kind of transparent in the background, just to see what the baseline plume boundary looked like with the earliest data that we had available. And then as you continue to scroll down, you know, you can continue to see the changes over time, ending with the 2015 to 2018 time period. And so this just, you know, as you scroll down, it goes through each of the 7 contaminants. And so I won't kind of go through each of these right now, but I just kind of wanted to highlight what this information is showing, and, you know, kind of how you can look at the data in more detail. And so I guess before I move on, I don't know if anyone has any particular questions about this section, or I could, you know, keep going, and if no one has any pressing questions, I guess, I don't know what you guys all want to do.
I just wanted to make a comment that, like, the color changes and that, those were suggestions from the community focus group. And also the cool thing, you can't see it on here, but when you're doing this yourself, if you can't see it clearly, you can zoom in and zoom out. It's very interactive, so you can look at it kind of how you want to look at it.
Yeah, and for all these little maps on the side, there's this expand button, and so if you click it, it kind of takes up the full screen as well. And then if you just click it again, it'll go back to the regular website. So I'll jump to the groundwater monitoring well section. I think this will be an area that's of a lot of interest to folks. We have 2 separate maps, and the first one is just showing the most recent water quality results through the latest sampling we had was from October of 2018. And so, you know, that's what we're calling the most recent, because that's, you know, what was most recent at the time. And so this map, when you first scroll down to it, you know, it has this information that you can scroll through that explains what all these different widgets are. And, you know, just kind of when you click on a layer, how the information is shown. You know, sometimes there will be 2 different wells that are on top of one another, and so you might see multiple windows pop up, and so this just kind of shows how to navigate through them. And so you have to click OK to get to the actual map. But then, you know, if you want to go back to that information, this information, or this about widget at the top here, you can just click that and it will expand this, and then all that same information that showed up at the very beginning is all right here. And so, like I said, this is showing the most recent water quality result for each well, and it's color-coded based on if the well had, it's color-coded in red if at least one of the 7 contaminants had an enforcement standard exceedance, and then it's colored in orange if at least one of them had a preventative action limit exceedance, and then all the blue wells are wells that did not have an enforcement standard or preventative action limit exceedance. And then you'll also notice that some of these wells kind of like perfectly align. Just because this is an interactive map and you can zoom in a little bit further, we wanted to protect the privacy of the residential wells, and so they're slightly offset, so they're not showing the exact location. And if you click on a well, we just have a, we don't show the actual well name, since I know that that's usually reflected with the landowner's name. And so, yeah, on this map, you know, you can click through click any of these wells to pull up the water quality information. So, you know, we can just click on one of these red wells where we see that there's an exceedance. And so I guess a couple of things to note here. The first is that, you know, you see this 1 of 4, which means there's actually 4 different wells that have like been pulled up in this information box. And so we're just looking at the first one, which is this A layer well. And we have the concentration of each of the 7 contaminants and the date that it was last sampled. And then also, you know, if it's a non-detect, it just means that, like, for example, this well is all non-detects. And so it's just that this concentration value is the lowest detectable limit for this contaminant. And so, you know, it's not detected in this well. If we scroll through this little arrow here, you know, so this is now looking at the C layer well. And so looking at this one, we can see that for 2,4-DNT, it's still a non-detect, but we do have detections for 2,6-DNT and total DNT. And the values are color-coded based on if it's a PAL exceedance or an ES exceedance. And also it gives you the date. And so these are both from the latest sampling that we had from October of 2018. And then there's a non-detect for the rest of these. And so we kind of just scroll through again, looking at the E layer well, we don't have any detections. And in the B layer well, we do again have some detections that are above those limits. And you can also, on this particular map, you can filter if you're, you know, concerned with a particular contaminant. Like, say you want to look at all the wells that have a total DNT enforcement standard exceedance or preventative action limit exceedance. You can toggle this button on, and so it will just kind of get rid of all those wells that have a non-detect for total DNT. And then you can turn on multiple filters at once, and so it will, you know, pull up wells that have a detection for any of these. So it doesn't have to like fulfill the criteria for having a detection for all of these contaminants at the same time. It's just if it has an exceedance for at least one of the contaminants where you have a filter toggled on, then it will show up on the map. So I mean, we could turn on all of the different filters and just see, you know, where we have a detection that's exceeding the PAL or the ES. And then also, you know, just to note, not all of the wells were sampled as frequently or as recently as other wells. And so this well, just towards the top of the propellant burning ground plume, was last sampled in October of 2013. So that's kind of all the information that's shown on this particular map. The next one has a combination of the most recent 10 results for each contaminant, and we also have the plume boundaries that you can pull up for this map as well. So you can kind of see more information all together. And so for this one, you have to opened it as a separate map. This one that is embedded within the website, you can also click this button here. This is open live content in a new tab, and it will just pull it up into a new tab as well, if you want that option. And so this is the last map that's showing more water quality results. Again, the map information window is pulled up, and so we recommend reading through all of this. And then if you hit OK, the default is for all the layers to be turned off because there are so many layers on this particular map. But if you go back to the information, all that information that was in that initial pop-up window is displayed again here. And so if you go to this layers widget, it has the 7 different contaminants. And so we can start by turning on the 2,4-DNT. And I don't know how well you all can see this from the screen that's projected, but there's like a little arrow at the far left next to this checkbox. And if you click it, it'll expand the 2 different layers that are available to turn on or off within the 2,4-DNT contaminant kind of grouping. And so we have the plume boundary for the 2015 to 2018 time period, and then the individual wells. And again, you can click on, they're color coded based on the exceedances. And so this is a little different because when you click the pop-up window, it's showing just the results for 2,4-DNT in this particular window. And it's showing you all the different results for the 10 most recent samples. And so in this case, we have one from June 2018, June 2017, going back down to October 2010. And so there were some detections between 2010 to 2014. And then in the more recent samples, this well has been a non-detect. And so if you click on this middle widget, it'll just show you kind of all the information that's currently toggled on the map. And you can turn on more than one layer. It just might kind of get pretty busy turning multiple layers on, but if you want to see all of them, then that's totally possible. We'll just kind of turn on the 3 DNT layers so we can see the plume boundaries for the 2,4-DNT, 2,6-DNT, and total DNT. If you click on one, it'll tell you what contaminant this is, showing the plume boundary for the time period and the plume that it's showing. And sometimes these kind of overlap, so you might see this window just show the information 3 different times for the 3 different plumes. And then you can click on the wells inside the plumes to see where we had the detection that might be causing this plume to be delineated in this particular location. And then at the bottom it tells you what the preventive action limit and the enforcement standard thresholds are for this particular contaminant. And finally, we have the same kind of filtering method on this map where you can also toggle these on to just filter out wells that have an enforcement standard or a preventative action limit exceedance.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Laura, go ahead.
Laura, did you have a question? I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, I'm muted. The central plume hasn't moved off-site and approaches Gruber's Grove Bay. At a previous meeting, it was stated that the plume may be going underneath that bay. From your research, do you agree with that? That may be happening?
I'm I'm not sure which section are you talking about?
The one where your arrow is at right now.
Uh-huh.
And then move to the south,
Mm-hmm.
and then you approach Gruber's Grove Bay.
Mm-hmm.
It was stated at a previous meeting that that plume may be actually going underneath that bay and going down to the 3 dots where it says Lake Wisconsin.
Oh, I'm not sure. We didn't look at that. That might be a different study, so we can't really say from this information.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. But you can like look at all the wells that are kind of right around here just to see when they had detections and what the dates were. So hopefully that will, help reveal some information about what's going on in that particular area. And then, we do have a really small plume right here that you can barely see until you zoom in further. And we have the wells toggle off when you zoom in closer, just again to kind of protect the privacy of the well locations. But hopefully, people who live in certain areas will kind of be familiar with which wells are near their property. So hopefully that will still be helpful. So I mean, that's what this is showing. So it's really just highlighting the plume boundaries and making them interactive, and then having these 2 different maps where you can just view the most recent well concentrations through October of 2018, and then kind of looking back at the 10 most recent results with the plume boundaries. At the very bottom, we have, my email and then my colleague James, who helped create this. So anyone can feel free to email either one of us as you're going through this on your own if you have questions, or, if there's any suggestions for what additional information might be really useful, or how, we could possibly make this easier or more effective to use in the future. Those suggestions are really helpful for us to have. For our opportunities to update this in the future, we can take those into consideration.
Thank you very much, Marina.
Anybody have questions?
No problem.
It really came a long way from where you first showed us to how it is now.
We do have one question.
How soon will we see an update with more recent data? I mean, 2018 is 4 years old already, and we've been told with the groundwater treatment discontinued that there's been more changes. So when will we see those on those maps?
Sure. What we've discussed recently with USGS on the modeling side is bringing them up to date on the modeling. So that's the near-term target. We have not discussed adding additional data here, but that we could do that if that's an interest of the community. But on the modeling side, and as they run the transport model to look at the plume, I have talked with Howard, Meg, and I recently talked about that, and that's something that we're looking at for next year.
Okay, thank you.
How many wells are on the property?
Total? I don't know.
Any idea?
No idea. I mean, it's hundreds.
Just over 200. On monitoring wells, there's over 200 monitoring wells.
Yeah. But there's another, whatever.
Another 58 residential wells as well.
Matt, did you want to take a 5-minute break before Joel starts?
I'll leave that up to the group here. So Joel's got a quick groundwater sampling update, and then I've got about 3 or 4 slides on recent Army progress on specific topics of interest. So I'm guessing we could be out of here in the next 20 to 30 minutes if we take a quick break and do that, and it's up to y'all.
Quick question, and we just saw something that could be very valuable publicly, and it's already on your website, so it's in the public domain. I think the question for the RAB is, okay, are we going to keep this under a bushel, or are we going to develop a strategy to get a news release or somehow get this out to the community? It's an opportunity, quite honestly, for the Army, in my opinion, to show some transparency on what we've got out here. The Army does not have a real good reputation right now in this community. I think we got to look at an opportunity to show that, yeah, there is something going on for all this money that's being spent. And it's an opportunity for the public to look at it, to be totally transparent.
Wanted to note
No,
that
that's a good idea. We can do that. We can, so we have a contractor that does outreach that can write an article about it and submit it to the local newspapers. And if you have other suggestions for how to get the word out, we certainly can do that.
Well, I think we should do a news release, not just to the local media, but including the Madison media. There are a lot of people that eventually are going to recreate out here, and they're going to want to know what's going on as well. So I don't think we should just confine it to the Sauk-Prairie area.
Okay.
I agree to that.
Yeah, I agree too. It was good. And Marina did a wonderful job on this map. And her
Yes, she
colleagues.
did.
And was very open to input. And so I'm very appreciative of that. Now, the one thing the Army should keep in mind too is when we make this public, which it sounds like we will, they'll have Robin's concern, which is why is it just up to 2018? So I think that would be in Army's best interest to contract with USGS. From what Marina told me, it's not that hard to import the new data, so it probably won't be terribly expensive.
No, that's good. That's good feedback. I mean, if it's a tool that the community uses and likes and values, then certainly then it's worth our investment in keeping that up. So, absolutely.
Have analytics on that you could tell us how many visitors and that sort of thing, so we can tell if our media efforts are useful or not.
Yeah, so I know that through the website that we used to create it, there are some analytics, but I can talk to our web person too to see if they can dive into any kind of like further details.
Okay, thank you.
I would also recommend that we're getting to the time of year where we're all putting out a newsletter as towns. And I would recommend putting at least a paragraph with that link in it so that it gets out to the surrounding community, because a news article is great, but less and less people are using newspapers. And so we need a way that it actually reaches the community, and I think our newsletters might be as good as any.
I agree. And just because we put out a news release doesn't mean it'll get published.
Right. So
we can try both avenues, and if your group has, social media and you can put a link on your Facebook page, that works too.
I think it would be helpful as a village representative to have verbiage. So if there's like a short blurb that perhaps the Army could help to give to us, that would make me more likely to right away give it to my municipality. So, or for some of you with your organizations, if you can help us with that, I think it's more likely it'll get done.
Okay.
The meeting will also be on YouTube on Sauk-Prairie Indy, I-N-D-Y.
Yeah.
I can do an edited version of Marina's tutorial, which might help guide people through that interactive website.
And I just posted a link to the live stream in the meeting too. So that'll be recorded and you can all go back there, and it has the links that have been in the chat tonight. It's all there in the chat on the live stream. Yeah.
Okay, so is the vote to take a quick break or to push through?
Just go.
Push. All right. So Joel's up with a quick groundwater monitoring update.
Yes.
Is that the largest that gets? Or?
Yes.
Oh.
That is in presentation mode.
Oh, okay.
Feel free to walk up there.
I was really hoping it would be a little bit bigger. Yeah.
Mary Carol Solon.
I don't have any control over how it presents on that screen.
Oh, okay.
Do we want to have him try to do it from his?
I don't have Teams working. I can't get to the link of the meeting at all, so.
Would it help if you were up there closer at all, or is that just too blurry?
None of us can see it any bigger.
Or is it a laptop that you can see?
It's challenging to do these hybrid meetings.
Oh, it's on my laptop, but then no one online can see what I'm
Yeah.
doing.
This is what people are seeing online. So it's a little more legible.
Right, so
on-
online,
Yeah.
it depends on the size of your monitor, how big it is. So it looks really good on my monitor.
If you're on,
Yeah.
if you're on
Us,
YouTube, you can
we're a
see
little challenged. I mean, I even did it, and I'm challenged, so.
Is this published somewhere?
It-
Well, we have a
It's on our
copy.
website.
It
Well,
is.
we also have a copy of it out there too, that somebody printed too. so.
And I also put it on the website as well, on the front page.
Okay. So, just an update on what we've been doing for groundwater since our April meeting. So we did have April sampling. We are sampling some wells in each plume, term burning ground, nitrocellulose plume, propellant burning ground, and then in the central plume. So we do have June groundwater that we just finished, and I do have a map on that, and that is mostly of the central plume. And then next week, we're starting the August residential 58 wells that we were discussing. And so those residential wells are going to be around the deterrent burning ground in Wiggins Bay, down at the bottom of the central plume, down by Gruber's Grove Bay, and then there's some wells scattered along the propellant burning ground plume, Keller Road, some down by the Windings, and then we have in September, which is a similar sampling event to April of semi-annual, where it's mostly doing the propellant burning ground and the deterrent burning ground wells. Next slide. Oh, so you can't read any of the, you guys can,
We can read it.
can you read the
Oh,
text?
not the small
Oh,
and the map.
online, you probably can read the actual values. Okay, so there are values, there are values on there. So this is showing what our June results are for D&T. So the central plume is mostly a D&T plume. We do some VOC testing down by Water's Edge, but the source area is pretty much D&T. And so in this map, we're showing the plume based on what last year and this year results are. And we have blue dots where we have D&T exceedances. And then there's not very much exceedance down at the edge of the plume. Oh, there we go. So up at this is the landfill area, and last year Luke with the DNR had asked that we add a whole bunch more monitoring wells that exist over there. So testing did show that the plume boundary is in fact still where we're showing it, and these wells further out to the east, these NLN wells are clean. Again, we had tested them several years ago, but now those wells are going to be tested every year for D&T. They're tested for landfill parameters in general, but now we're going to be doing an annual D&T with all the rest of these monitoring wells. So we know that the plume is still moving in a southerly direction and not turning over to the river more towards like Summer Oaks area. It is not turning that direction. It is still going down south towards Gruber's Grove Bay. As far as like the results of it, very similar to what we had last year. There's still very high results in this well nest here that are 0.2 or close to 0.3 for total D&T. So very similar to what we talked about in June of last year. So that's the highest concentration well here. As far as, oh, there you go, almost a little further to the north, who's ever zooming in. Is that Kathy?
That's Kathy.
Oh, yeah.
The other north.
The other north.
That really helps. You can see it a lot
Yeah.
better.
Can you go to the north, Kathy? Up. There you go. Okay, so this is the wellness we're talking about. So we have the highest concentration here, but we still do not have any DNT being showing up here. This round, this well nest did not have DNT, but last year there was. So we're not discounting that information. And we still have no DNT found out here towards the east, indicating that this subdivision does still not have any potential impacts. Summer Oaks and Inspiration Drive area. So we still have high concentrations here, lower concentrations to the south, but something we need to continue monitoring. Next slide. There you go. Okay, so this slide does not have DNT results updated specifically for the term burning ground plume. This is an update from April. Very similar results to what we had in the fall. I call out this red box. So Kathy, if you want to zoom into where that red box is. We have, so last year we had in this A level well here, we had DNT exceeding the enforcement standard. And so we actually, it's 3,4 DNT, which is the compound, and that is the frequent compound, including 2,3 that we're finding in this plume. So 2,4 and 2,6 are not something we're finding in the turn burning ground, and we've discussed this before, but it just recalls that those are degrading faster. 2,3 and 3,4 are sticking around, and this plume is showing that over many, many years, 2,3 and 3,4. So this is what we're finding up gradient. This well nest here on site, we're finding 2,3 and 3,4 above. This well nest, we're finding 3,4, and last year was the first year we found it in there. So we are still seeing that this well is getting, this nest is getting a 3,4 detection above the enforcement standard. So something we have to keep watching. We have increased testing, so we're doing quarterly of this nest. So this nest is getting quarterly. We're testing this residential well quarterly to keep showing there's nothing this year found there. And down in here, we're testing quarterly. So I know that Matt had mentioned something in his presentation about the down gradient portion of this. And so that's something that the Army is working on with the DNR to evaluate. Next slide. So the propellant burning ground, probably could zoom into just the upper right box a little bit, Kathy. There you go. So we're just showing the source area here. DNT is the main contaminant that we're evaluating still in the source area, the propellant burning ground. So underneath some of these wells is where the capped area is, where all the waste pits were, all the major burning was going on back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and some in the 70s. All the volatiles have disintegrated in this area still, so all those stuff that went down gradient, all of the volatiles in this area have been pretty much remediated in the groundwater with all the different treatment systems, but the DNT is still out there. So with some of the wells, this is the well nest here, right south of the cap, that has had those high increases over the years. And just to give you an update from April, so the A and the B well here,
Came unplugged somehow. Okay.
So over the last 2 years, the A and the B well have increased in D&T concentration. The A level well is the one that had been at 1,000, and then, you know, there was a lot of concern. And then it had dropped down quite a bit with the water level dropping. You know, water table has been down a lot in this area, but there has been some slow increase now in the A and B, still below 100, but way above what we were talking about, say, 10 years ago at a meeting about what is D&T at the cap. So we used to be talking about 2 or 3 parts per billion in these same wells, and now we're talking about 10 or 20, 30 parts per billion or so. So it's still something to be looking out for. As far as, if you could zoom into the plant boundary, where that red line is across, Kathy. There you go. So last year we had talked about that this side of the plume is chlorinated solvent. So D&T is not really something we're watching over here. So this is residential wells being tested, and carbon tetrachloride is a contaminant of concern over in this area. And so we're starting to see this plume moving a little bit further east, so as we had talked about last year. So same information. I want to point out that there are monitoring wells still over here. They were sampled last in 2020. And so there is a consideration that we could add those wells to show that the contaminant isn't, you know, plume isn't shifting even further. So that's something that can be evaluated without installing additional wells, is just sampling other wells within the plume. There's a lot of other wells in the propellant burning ground plume that can be sampled, so we do have a lot of options, at least on site, for changing the sampling program around. And then as far as down gradient, if you want to zoom in, I'll answer one of those questions way down by the river, Kathy. There you go. So just so you know, there's an E level well right here on Highway Z. It had been really down the middle of the plume. The ones off site are CD, and this is, I believe, also a CD. So there's just D level wells down gradient, and this is a BCD, and this is a CD over on the east side. So we don't have any E-level wells past this boundary down gradient. So just want to clarify that point of what people were asking about. The E-level wells that we do have are in the windings, and those are not showing the chlorinated solvent plume or non-exceedances. Those were last tested in 2020. So we did all these wells in 2020 in the propellant burning ground at least once. We gave, that all stuff is in there, all the data is provided to the DNR, and we drew all kinds of fancy concentration maps, but, so we don't have any plans at this point to do that in the next year or two. And now we're ready for questions. That was it.
I don't think there are any questions.
I go back to my,
Question?
how do you know which wells to test?
Oh, how do I know?
Anybody? Because
Well,
you said we got a bunch of wells, we don't know how many. So which ones don't we test and which ones?
so if you were looking at the propellant burning ground map, all the wells off site that are near the plume or are bounding the plume are being tested. And then once we get near the plant boundary, then we're making sure we have wells on either side of the plume to try to make sure we got it bounded this way. And then we have wells vertically that we're making sure that we're bounding it inside and outside, so you know it's not scooting out from underneath. Then when you get on site, you're trying to do similar things where you're trying to keep horizontally, and then you're also trying to get a vertical profile of what you do have available, so you can kind of get the slices that Matt was talking about. And then at the source area, we're just trying to evaluate more of the mass of where are the heaviest concentrations located, and just keeping a monitoring of what is available. And then we have tested the wells that are, you go to the north, up gradient, just to make sure there isn't something coming in, and there isn't. So that's the propellant burning ground idea. The central plume idea is, I don't believe there's any wells anymore that aren't being tested. I think we're testing them all. And then the deterrent burning ground, there's only a few wells by the plant boundary that are way off to the side. Otherwise, all the wells are being tested. So it's really just the propellant burning ground that has a lot of other wells.
Around the burn area and the wells, the wells around there are getting tested.
Yeah.
And the tested.
And that question is, the Army develops a plan and WDNR reviews it and concurs or doesn't concur, and then we come to agreement on the monitoring plan. And that's how Joel knows which ones to test.
Okay, thank you.
We have, 20 years ago, there was a much different idea of the sampling plan here, so.
Oh, they changed?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the parameters used to be different back then, too.
You could do it back then.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
And I just have a follow-up question. Did you come up with the number of wells that have been replaced? Or do you need more
7.
time? It is 7, okay.
Yeah, 3 in the propellant burning ground, 3 in the central plume, and 1 in the deterrent burning ground.
Thank you.
All right. Come up. Thank you, Joel. Appreciate it. So some quick updates here from ongoing actions with the Army. So going back to what Matt talked about earlier in the presentation, and really where the rubber meets the road, the outcomes of that study. Obviously, he spoke directly to the fact that we needed some more fidelity to some of the plume delineation downstream. And so the Army, Sauk-Prairie, USGS, and WDNR met recently and kind of walked through where those data gaps are, if you will. And so Sauk-Prairie has prepared a draft plan for installation of new wells to facilitate answering some of those data gaps for the delineation of the plumes. And the Army's got that for review, and then we'll send that to WDNR for their review and concurrence input they may have. Additionally, the long pole in the tent there is going to be working with the landowners, obviously, to gain access to those properties and implement new wells. So we should have that draft plan here to WDNR in the next month or so, and then we'll move forward once they concur with those new well locations. I think we're looking at about 8 wells currently, and then once they approve that, we'll enter into negotiations with the landowners and seek access to their property to put wells on their property. So,
Laura has a question.
Yes, Laura.
It sounds like an echo. 4 people said, Laura has a question. All right. I was wondering if the RAB and the community can see the draft plan before it's finalized. We realize that the authority to approve comes from DNR, but since it's going to affect neighboring properties, it would be nice to really see that before it's finalized.
Sure, I don't have an issue with that. Once DNR looks at it and approves, and I think that we're on the same page, we can share that with you all and solicit any feedback you all may have that could be pertinent to the discussion. Absolutely.
Thank you. It's helpful if it's before it's finalized because it's really hard to erase ink.
Sure. Understand.
Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So Gruber's Grove Bay, last time we introduced some Omaha District Corps of Engineers folks to you and talked about the contract that we were going to award this summer. So right now that contract is under bid. And so you can see the overall objective of the contract to look at the conceptual site model, address data gaps, and evaluate alternatives for remedial action at Gruber's Grove Bay. So right now we anticipate proposals coming in about the 14th of August, mid-August, and then once we do technical evaluations and send funding to contracting, and then that award is looking at approximately mid-September, so.
Are you having trouble with getting your contracts bid on?
Not bid on. I mean, we have a, you know, as maybe some of you have seen, you know, just with general workforce overall, you know, the government's has a lack of available labor, and particularly in our contracting agencies, and so that's put a little bit of a bottleneck there. I will say that this summer, you know, working on probably half a dozen or more new contract actions. It seems like less companies are bidding, so we're getting bids. We're getting a decent amount of bids, but not as many as we have in the past. So, but that's just kind of circumstantial. I mean, it's a small subset, so you know, I don't have a good feel for overarchingly where things stand. Yes, I do.
Are they looking at different alternatives?
Yes, sir.
Rather than dredging?
Well, it will include dredging as well. So
this contract is just to determine what you're going to do?
This contract will take us through an evaluation of alternatives and then codify the final alternative. So we've dredged twice now. Obviously, it's left some contamination in place. So we want to be good stewards and do the right thing on this third go round. And so, yeah, there will be, much like on the groundwater aspect, there'll be a proposed plan which delineates the Army's proposed alternative, a public comment period where you all get to have input into that, and then there'll be a decision made, and obviously in concert with WDNR as well. And then we would fund whatever outcome that decision is. So, yes.
When you award
Good
that
question. Raise
contract,
your hand, put it back down.
when you award that.
Yeah, I did, and I think that was Charlie that asked it. This is not to let a contract to have the dredging. This is just a contract to evaluate various routes to go, right?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
When you put this out and you award the contract, do you have a timeline where you're expecting these proposals to be submitted then?
Yeah, so 14 August, the proposals will come in.
And that's the ones, they're gonna say, this is how you should do it?
No,
This
no.
is to come out. So when are you expecting them to turn that finished product into you?
Right, so the contract's got several layers to it, if you will. So over the next year, the alternative, well, we'll look at the data, right? The contract will look at the data, say, hey, here's what we know, here's where we think we have data gaps, collecting the information that's needed to fill in those data gaps and complete the analysis. So that's a couple-year process. So we'll look at the data gaps, collect information. They'll then, we'll work with them to develop alternatives and have that alternative analysis as we typically do in a feasibility study, where you look at the 9 criteria under CERCLA that talk about cost, implementability, technical practicability, those kind of things. And so there'll be a litany of potential technologies that could be utilized, hopefully. It may come back to dredging, I don't know. And so
we're probably looking at 5 to 7 years before anything's done. When we go back to report, I think that's, when you say you need feedback, that's the feedback I get, is when is something gonna be done?
Sure.
We've all heard study.
Right. Well, I would articulate it, Gruber's Grove Bay has been dredged twice, right?
It has.
So, I mean, you can't say there's been inaction. We are trying to take the appropriate steps to implement the correct action. But yes,
So
agreed.
somewhat of a timeline just gives us something to respond to
Yes,
that?
absolutely. And once we have that contract awarded, we can lay out those exact timelines and a schedule, absolutely.
That will be helpful. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, though, last meeting and the meeting before that, we were told FY24 for actual work on the ground. Of course, before that, we were told it was going to be this FY22. But from what you just laid out, and given that we're quickly approaching FY23 already, is FY24 significantly in doubt?
Yeah, so I don't recall, I haven't been part of any previous meetings until the last one. I was here for the last one. We didn't make any kind of commitment as far as remedial action in FY24. We talked about this taking a step back, which was a retraction, if you will, of previous commitments from the Army, and I'll give you that. But
well, does this contract, does that include the risk, public health risk analysis? It does. Okay, because our experience with doing that in the groundwater approach is taken about 2 years. So
Sure.
if we take that
Yeah.
and move that forward, what we were told FY24 is probably in doubt.
I think so, yeah.
And Chris, I am looking at my notes from the last meeting. I've got FY25 is what you had told us?
Is that what I said? Okay, yeah, that sounds more on the line of, it'll probably take a couple of years to collect data and get.
I'm not gonna be here, I'm gonna be dead by then.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, you gotta put it off.
If I wanna see this thing through.
We have different technology now than they had before. So we've seen some demonstrations on things that they're doing now that they hadn't done before. So yeah, it's bad that it's taken so long, but the technology is kind of catching up to what we need.
Are any of these contractors that they get, are they ever held responsible for screwing up the job?
I won't comment on that. Yeah, I mean it's a tough deal, right? Well, part of it, I mean, you've got to look at all aspects of it. I don't want to get too off track here, but sometimes the government's at fault as far as putting out proper objectives and contracting for the correct thing.
Quick little story, the last contractor, I asked him if he really knew what he was getting into, because they always talk about this contaminant being floating in the water. And he chewed me out royally, how I could confront him and ask him if he knew his job. He had been doing that, and he went right out and screwed it up.
When they yell at you, you know they're
Yeah,
making mistakes.
exactly.
Best offense.
Yeah. They're covering up for something.
But he got his money.
Okay, next slide, please. So, groundwater remedial investigation, feasibility study, proposed plan. So, you've all seen the remedial investigation and the feasibility study, which laid out alternatives. So the proposed plan is the next step. So that is the preferred approach to remedial action to remedy groundwater at the site. So obviously we've been through multiple phases. We've had groundwater treatment plants in place. Those have been shut down, and we've been kind of in a monitored natural attenuation approach while we go through this plan. So we have a draft proposed plan in place now, which would document our preferred alternative for treatment of groundwater at the site for all 3 plumes. And then, so that's under Army review right now. And again, it'll go to WDNR for their review and concurrence, any comments they may have. And then as part of the CERCLA process, we will have a specific proposed plan meeting with the public. It'll be advertised and open to the general public. Sometimes we do poster board sessions, sometimes we do presentations, those kind of things, but really just facilitate information sharing and feedback from the public. And there'll be a 30-day public comment period where you can submit written comments, and then those will be considered for any final decision. And then we're looking at sometime early next year to start that decision-making process. Ideally, we'll have a proposed plan public comment meeting this fall, and then move to the decision-making phase early next year. And then the follow-on to that would be a contract to implement the preferred approach. We've also talked with USGS about potentially doing a pilot study to ensure to inform the design for the approach. So if we move forward in the vein that we think we're moving forward in, and WDNR and the community approves that, then we'll likely utilize USGS to help us with that design aspect of it as well. So any questions on where we're at with the site-wide groundwater?
Laura has a question.
Yes, Laura.
She did have a question. Are you muted, Laura?
I'm unmuted, I don't have a question, I clicked it by accident.
Oh, okay.
Anybody else have a question in the room?
Just any ideas on timeline?
Yeah, so, I mean, we've really just got to get it through review in the Army internally and through legal, and it'll go to WDNR. And so I think it's pretty solid, you know, mid to late fall, we could have a proposed plan out to the public for review and comment, and then schedule that meeting. You know, oftentimes we try to do that meeting right in the middle of the 30-day public comment period, so you've had a couple weeks to review what we've proposed, come forward, meet in person, have a discussion, meet with the team and talk through that, and then have a couple of weeks to submit your questions or comments to that proposed action. So
Looks like we've got one more question. Roger?
Is this one of the steps in the RIFS that we've been discussing for 4 or 5 years?
Right, so per CERCLA phase, yes, the RIFS is a multifaceted phase. Most of them are kind of standalone, but the RIFS has the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, the proposed plan, and the decision document. So yeah, it's kind of the most complicated, if you will, of the phases. So it has 4 different aspects of it. And yeah, this would the way we count beans, if you will, in the Army, the RIFS phase would be complete once we sign the decision document.
Okay, so how far along do you think we are in this RIFS? Are we halfway there?
We're more than halfway there, yeah. So the investigation and the feasibility study are typically the longer aspects. Typically the investigation itself is where you spend the majority of your time. The feasibility study looks at all of the alternatives and lays those out. And then really the proposed plan and record of decision or decision document kind of codify the outputs of the RI and the FS. So we're more than halfway through, I'd say, and we're on the leading end of it.
What do those capital letters mean?
Capital letters?
The letters, you just say the RI.
I'm sorry. Remedial investigation, feasibility study. Right.
Thank you.
So you got the remedial investigation, feasibility study, proposed plan, and then decision document. So sorry, yeah.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on the website, there's a description of each of those phases on the resources page.
But then you have to know how to get there. Oh, sorry.
This is true. Okay, any other questions on the groundwater? Right, next slide, please.
Looks like we have, Laura, you have a question?
Yes, I was thinking about the 30-day public comment period, and I'm thinking if we have a consultant to work with the RAB and we have a RAB meeting, I think 30 days is going to be difficult, and so we'll probably be asking for at least 45.
Okay. Yeah, I think
just by way of feedback.
Yeah, I don't know of anything that precludes us from extending it. It's a minimum 30 days, but yeah, I don't think there's anything legally that preventing us from having a longer public comment period, to my knowledge.
Hey, Matt.
Okay.
I got a question. So if comment period doesn't start until after the DNR gets to review it, but, so Laura, the comment period for you could start because the DNR has it, and so now it would be available to the public to see, I would assume, correct? Is that true, that once it's at the DNR?
No, we typically don't issue it to the public until DNR has seen it, commented, we've resolved any issues we have from their perspective, and then we would publish it for the public. So, yeah.
Just want to make sure that.
Yeah.
Is it not an open records request once the DNR has it?
I guess you could go about it that way. Sure, yeah.
I would think as a state agency, they'd be subject to it.
Yeah.
It would be open, it would be.
A public record?
Yeah.
Yeah,
public
unless there's
record
something
request.
else that would prevent it, yeah. No, I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
Okay, thank you.
But typically, I mean, just from a, the way we typically do business is we want to have the regulatory agency on board with what we're, what we're proposing before we go out to the public. So obviously, if they're against what we're doing and it goes out to the public, then it's kind of, it just muddies the water.
Right. Yeah, that's
So in the past, sometimes what we do is we meet with the WDNR, we negotiate with them without providing them the official copy of the document for their review. We just kind of give them a little briefing about it, see if they're on board with it. If they are totally against it, then we may go back to the drawing board. But if they're, on board with it and understand what we're trying to do and agree, then we officially provide it to them, and that's when your sunshine laws go into effect.
Right. Yeah, and the only other caveat I would add to that is once the document's in-house to us, that just because it's with us doesn't mean that we're in agreement or disagreement. Our official comments will then go back, and then the Army will address our comments at that point, yeah. So I just want to make sure that's clear too.
Right, but I still would like to see, when it's submitted to the DNR, we can go to the DNR to get it, but they don't have a lot of staff time to be responding to those requests. I mean, it can take a week or two, and that depends. Fortunately, we have staff that's pretty cooperative, but to get it online, I think, and that was one of the things in the operating procedures too, is when documents are submitted to the DNR or to another agency, that they're posted on the Badger website at the same time. It just, I know it's possible to get it, but it's a very cumbersome process, and
Laura, we did that with the RIFS and with the PFAS PASI. So we have done that in the past.
right. The reason I bring it up is because we're a couple years behind in keeping the Badger website updated.
It is now totally up to date, missing a couple documents, but it is updated.
That's great. That's great.
Matt, this is Robert. Just to interject one thing on your previous point. There is no prohibition for us extending the public comment period. The language in the statutes and the regulations speak to at least a certain number of days, so you can definitely go beyond that if there's a need from the public.
Great, thanks, Robert. So Robert's
That's correct, yeah.
our cleanup attorney with
25.
PVC, so, yeah.
And then on a related question, if we're thinking like this fall, will we have TAP money by then?
We will probably have the money. The contract would be, it'd be pretty tight, yeah, from a, that's a good point. From a timing perspective, I mean, the money's not an issue. $25,000 is pretty easy to secure. So, yeah, if we seek the waiver, do the application, get that approved, contracting is a long pole in the tent, and it is a small acquisition. So I'll have to talk with our contracting folks as to how quickly they could get that done. Since it's only $25,000, there may be some streamlining we can do to get that done more quickly. But yeah, that's a good point.
That'll be important for us.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, moving to the next couple of topics. So settling pond, expanded site inspection. So we're working on an acquisition now to look at all three settling ponds and Final Creek, which I know, Robin, you're very interested in. We did last time we were here go out and see the grains in the creek there. So we're contemplating a non-time critical removal action to go out and pull those off the surface, and that would be a part of this contract. And Mr. Ellington, to your point, another thing we're looking at as part of this contract is that site-wide groundwater monitoring plan. So that's something I've noticed since I've come on board to the Badger project, is there is no one singular document I can go to say, here are our wells, here's which ones we sample, here's how frequently, and what intervals, all of those things. And so one of our things we want to get done is to have that in a singular document so that it can be handed to anybody at any time, and it would be very transparent as to what the requirements are. I think that'd help all parties involved. So instead of going, oh, well, piece of it's here, piece of it's there, you might miss a piece, right? So so that's one thing we're looking at as well. So that's a good point you made earlier about how do you know which ones you're looking at, right? And I had, coming on board, I had some of those very same questions. So so we're working on that acquisition right now. It'll likely be an early FY23 contract award for those. through our local contracting office, and we've got a number of tasks under that umbrella. Any questions there? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any testing that's been done in those areas, or is it, I mean, the pellets are a visual one, but.
Right. There's been testing in the past, and Joel can probably, he's got a better broad history. I think the 90s, some of those settling ponds were tested originally. I'm not positive about Final Creek, what sampling had been done, but yeah, there's been testing done up to 20,
What's your specific
25
question,
years ago.
Robin?
Do we know what needs to be remediated there? Do we know what's, so settling pond 2, when the fire came, we had beautiful smoke there, you know, all different colors. Do we know what we need to be remediating in those areas, or do we just know remediation is needed?
So I'll tell you the answer you don't want, but all the samples that were exceeding any soil criteria from the early 90s until, what are they, 2012 about, all of the samples that exceeded have been excavated.
Okay.
So the samples that were collected, that were near the surface, those have been taken care of when the DNR closed the site.
But there must still be noted that there's problems because we have deed restrictions for dirt disturbance. So we must know that there's more problems.
I'm just saying where the samples were collected.
That's done. So now we almost need another sampling to know it's still there.
Start over.
Yeah,
So that's where he's talking about expanding.
okay.
That the same thing would be a settling pond 2 would be in the other areas is evaluating, do you have the same thing? Do you have any of these compounds that in other locations that have not been excavated or not been sampled in the past? And that's what we did in settling pond 2.
Because I would assume, and this is just my layperson assuming that, it goes down Final Creek through settling pond 1 to settling pond 2. I would think your concentrations may be heavier earlier on, unless the water's just moving faster. It didn't sink in as much, but I'm just curious.
I remember, and without doing too much past history, but at the time when all of the soils were being sampled, the DNR did accept some property, and it was not at the cleanup. There was contamination in it. And so at that point, I know I was like, the Department of Natural Resources, you're taking dirty land, and they're like, So there's a lot of history going back that way, and that's just a surface, but perhaps DNR can help you too.
Right, and they opened up the that remediation was closed, and they reopened the entire settlement pond area, so.
Yeah,
It
they
all
might
needs to
have
go
the
through
record,
there
they might
again.
have the records for you.
Okay, just curious. I wasn't involved with it when it was back then.
Laura, you have a question?
Yes, I want to know if the rocket paste ditches are going to be part of that investigation, because wastewater went through those ditches and also went into settling pond number 2 and 3.
Yeah, not that we've contemplated at this point. I'd have to look further into, I'm not familiar with the rocket paste ditches and what we've done previously at those sites.
Yeah, because Final Creek was not the only input into the settling ponds.
Correct.
So the rocket paste area, particularly the ditches. Yeah, that would be a big mess if we don't.
Okay.
Thank
for that.
you.
All right, I think I have one more slide. So PFAS. So previously, we had completed a preliminary assessment site inspection at Badger for PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substances, the kind of the new emerging contaminant trend, and concluded that no further investigation was needed. Well, in May of 2022, EPA revised their regional screening levels for several PFAS compounds, and DOD took a look at that, and on the 6th of July issued us revised guidance as to how to proceed based on the new EPA regional screening levels. So at the propellant burning ground, now we're at no further action. We weren't going to do anything further there, but based on these new screening levels, it now requires a remedial investigation. So we've just been looking at that. This is all brand new over the last couple of weeks. So essentially, you've got 14 parts per trillion PFAS at the PVG in groundwater, and so then that's above the new threshold. I will caution that this is probably not the first change in the PFAS arena. So this is a moving target. EPA will likely promulgate MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, sometime over the next year or so, maybe by October 2023, I think is what they're looking at. But it is a moving daily target for us and reacting to that. So right now, that's the latest update. But so we've gone from a no further action to one site moving towards a remedial investigation at this point, and that could expand over time.
Laura has another question.
Yes, Laura.
Laura, did you have a question? You might be muted.
Yeah, I'm good. We'd like to recommend, again, looking at the deterrent burning ground. The activities at the propellant burning ground were during the Second World War and during the Korean conflict. And then those same activities were moved up to the northeast corner during the Vietnam War. And so if it's at PVG, it's pretty likely it's going to be at the deterrent burning ground. And in my recollection is there was no PFAS data gathered there at all. The other reason I raise this is if we're going to be looking at long-term solutions for groundwater contamination, we need to have that data sooner rather than later.
Sure.
That's my recommendation.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for that.
you.
Thanks for that input. Yes, ma'am.
This is just some information. We're upgrading from the contamination, but the sanitary district did have both of our wells tested for PFAS, and we came back clean.
Great.
So you're good coming into the plant, so we'll see where it goes from there.
Any other questions? So final recap here, and thank you all for your time this evening and sticking with us to 8:30 here. I know these are long meetings, but hopefully valuable to you all. But the proposed agenda or schedule, I'm sorry, for the next 3 meetings. So last meeting we talked about meeting quarterly. I assume that's still the desire. If not, we can revisit that. I do apologize for having to move this last meeting date. It was Susan departing. It just didn't work out from a schedule perspective and availability. So, and we didn't. It was just an unanticipated change for us. So, but this is the tentative schedule for going forward. So we're trying to stick to the first month of the quarter and the third Thursday. So, any other input on that still meet the needs of the community?
Roger, did you have something? Roger? You might be muted.
Yep, I was. My question has nothing to do with the agenda, the dates, they look good to me. But if I may ask a question?
Yes, sir.
About, as I recall, the last time they did some studies at Gruber's Grove Bay, the sediment far exceeded the allowable allowances, and I was just wondering, is there any danger to people swimming and boating and stuff in that bay?
I don't know that I can answer your question directly. What we are doing as part of this next effort is revisiting the conceptual site model, so looking at source, pathway, and potential receptors. So we will evaluate that based on all of the data over the last 20 plus years and determine if there is an actual risk to either human health or ecological risk. So yeah, I don't know that I could answer that question offhand.
I guess my question, I think, was probably directed more to the DNR people that are there, because, you know, read every once in a while that the beaches in Madison are closed because of bacteria or blue-green algae or something. Does the DNR ever monitor things like lead or things like that in the bottom of bays?
Yeah, I mean, part of the monitoring would be what the Army had just mentioned. I think that would be it. The beaches closing for algal blooms are gonna be a different type of hazard, and I think that's under our surface water program that monitors those, likely in conjunction with like local municipalities who control the beaches.
Okay, I was just curious, you know, if you ever had to shut the Gruber Grove Bay down, I think that all of a sudden there would be a lot of community uprising because of all those homes that are in that bay. That I guess we'll worry about that if it ever happens. Thank you.
I think there are some fish, DNR has some fish limits that you're supposed to eat. Kids, pregnant women, stuff like that, so that's an indication, I guess.
Michelle, do you have any closing comments?
I just wanted to make sure, Kate, you were wanting feedback from Matt at USGS for that question, correct?
Oh, just on the methodological, I pulled up the report and I found.
Okay, so you're good?
Yeah.
That was just what, I'm just trying to figure out what, I think all the loose ends are cleared up now.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for attending, and we will see you in October.
Do you want to call the meeting to an end?
I gotta do that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're done. Really formal.
Yes, meeting adjourned.
Yes, because we're doing administrative work again, so most likely we'll do the 5. Yeah, no, that's okay. You were here for the main meeting.
That's right.
I think that was, we're adjourning.